So what's leadership?
Leadership is accountability.
Leadership is not your position, it's more your actions.
To me, it's motivating, guiding, gathering multiple perspectives.
Leadership is hard, maybe harder right now than it's ever been in the history of ever.
Leadership is understanding your responsibility in the moment.
True leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders.
You got this.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Sharice Miller-Odukwe, Director of Student Activities at CAS-CIAC. Welcome to the 2020 CAS-CIAC High School Student Leadership Conference. Before we get started today, I would like to thank our sponsors, the Connecticut Army National Guard, Horace Mann, Jostens, Liberty Bank, and Connecticut Lighting Centers. Thank you for your sponsorship and support for CAS-CIAC and student activities. So welcome to our leadership conference. We are so excited to have you all here today. We hope that our message today will help to enhance your leadership skills in school, sports, activities, and most importantly, throughout your lives. One very important topic that I would like for you to think about throughout this conference is, what does leadership mean to you? We look forward to hearing your responses later on in the conference. We have a great lineup for you today. We will start off with a keynote presentation from Dr. Phil Campbell, AKA PC, from Jostens Renaissance, with a great message about inspiring the hopeless and empowering the dreamers. We then have Amanda Pickett from the State Department of Education. She will deliver a great message about identity and school culture. Kendrick Moore from Windsor High School will talk about becoming a better me. And to conclude, we will have a Q&A with Ryan Martin, Executive Director of the Ryan Martin Foundation, and John Holt, Media and Production Director at CAS-CIAC. There will be a 10-minute break after the conference. Then we will begin immediately with our post-conference college fair. We have great colleges from the area that are here today to tell you about their schools and to have a Q&A session with you after. In addition, we have the Connecticut National Guard here as well to tell you a little bit about their programs. We're excited to have everyone here today to join us. Please check out the chat throughout the conference for links for the college fair, post-conference college fair, and for the Connecticut National Guard to be able to join those meetings later. This conference will be recorded. Please be aware that you can adjust your speaker view to your preference in the top right-hand corner of your screen. The Q&A messaging feature is located at the bottom of your screen. Please direct all questions to the Q&A and specify who the question is for. You will also find the chat feature at the bottom of your screen where you can make comments throughout the conference. If for some reason you lose connection throughout the webinar, please just log off and log back on again, and we'll still be here. We welcome you and hope that you enjoy the conference. Now, it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's student moderators. We have Justin Oquendo, Senior at Civic Leadership High School, Jada Tinker, Senior at Civic Leadership High School, and Fiona Fredericks, Senior at Lime Old Lime. Please put some snaps in the chat and some claps and welcome our student moderators for today, Justin, Fiona, and Jada, and have a great conference. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for that awesome introduction, Sharice. So today we're just gonna start off the conference with a little icebreaker. As you can see, we're doing it this year online because of COVID and just everything that's going on, but thankfully we're still able to have it. So even though we're not able to see you guys in person, we would love to still get to know you guys. So if you can fill the chat with your name, your grade, what school you go to, and what sports you play, that'd be awesome.
Hi everyone, I'm Fiona Fredericks. I'm a senior at Old Lyme High School and I am part of the Student Athletic Advisory Board. I'll be one of your moderators today.
My name is Justin Aquendo. I go to Civic Leadership High School. I'm going to be one of the student moderators today. And yeah.
So it's awesome to see that you guys are coming from everywhere. I see Simsbury High School. It's going so fast. Old Lyme, Platt. So it's cool to see that we're all here together despite everything that's going on. I see people play soccer, track, basketball, football, swimming, lacrosse, volleyball. Wow, there's a lot of people here. Branford High School, Newington High School, Connecticut IB, EC Goodwin, Tortolet. I hope I said that right.
As these names keep coming through, we're going to start introducing our guest speakers. We have 3 today, or 4.
Okay. So we're first introducing Dr. Phil Campbell. Dr. Phil Campbell, known to his students as PC, is a 16-year-old educator with a passion for loving kids. His goal is to assist schools in becoming the best learning environment they can possibly be for students to learn and for teachers to teach. His philosophy is to accomplish this is simple. Put relationships first, genuinely love one another, and create a sense of family with your school setting. With educational experience as a teacher, coach, athletic director, and principal, PC has fought the battles on the front lines of education and understands how to win and connect with today's youth. I'm excited to welcome today's keynote speaker, Dr. Phil Campbell.
Good morning, and thank you, Justin. Good morning, Connecticut. I am so excited to have the opportunity to spend some time with you all here today. Before I dive in and get started, I want to give a shout out and say thank you to Charisse and to her team for putting this together and for considering me for the opportunity to spend some time with the student leaders of Connecticut here today. And I also want to give a special thank you to Erica Mativier, who is the Jostens rep, Jostens yearbook rep that services a lot of schools there in Connecticut, who helped to make this happen as well. So I want to give her a shout out too. As Justin said, my name is Dr. Phil Campbell. I go by PC. I worked in education for 16 years. I was a teacher, a coach, athletic director, and up until 5 years ago, I was a high school principal just a little bit north of Nashville, Tennessee. We used a program in our school called Jostens Renaissance and just had tremendous success with it. And so that led for me to have the opportunity to where now I work on the Jostens Renaissance team, and I travel around the world and I work with student leaders and I work with educators on school culture and climate and things that they can do to make their schools the best places that they can possibly be. And for those of you that may not be familiar with Renaissance, what is it, right? And my elevator pitch of what Renaissance is: high schools and middle schools, when I walk onto their campus, it takes about 2 minutes to figure out who the athletes are. It takes about 2 minutes to figure out who the upper level academic kids are. And it takes about 2 minutes to figure out who the frequent flyer kids are in the in the office for discipline type issues, right? But what about that middle 40, 50, 60% of your kiddos on your campus that come to school every day? They do the things that they have to do to contribute to making your school the great place that it is. How do we honor and recognize and celebrate each and every single one of those young men and young women on your campus as well? That is what Renaissance is all about. And the same concept holds true for the adults on your campus, right? You've got bus drivers, you've got custodial staff, you've got cafeteria staff, you have front office staff that go above and beyond in making your school the great place that it is. What are we doing to make sure that they feel like they're a part of the fabric of your school's community? And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here today for the next 40 minutes or so. And then when we get done, we're gonna have about a 5-minute session there with Jada where we can do some Q&A type things. So anytime you have questions, anything that I can help to answer, pop those in the Q&A there as well. We're gonna talk about a couple of different topics today. We're gonna go through and talk about mental health and coping strategies. Then we're gonna shift into time management. We're gonna spend some time on inclusion. And then we're gonna end with a little bit about leadership. And so those are the 4 things we're really gonna dive into today. So starting out, and talking about social emotional well-being and mental health and coping strategies. And I would argue that this has been a huge issue for a long time, right? But in light of the events that have happened, during 2020 with the pandemic, it's really brought social, emotional, mental health to the forefront. And I think it's important for you to understand that as a leader on your campus and as a leadership group, you can't say that you care about mental health and then allow toxicity to exist on your campus. You can't say that you care about mental health and then allow toxicity to exist in your inner circles, whether that's on social media, in your friend groups, those types of things. This isn't an issue that you can straddle. And so I challenge you to really think about, where do you stand on this issue, both as an individual leader and as a leadership group as a whole, when we're talking about social, emotional health and mental well-being. I was speaking in Virginia. It was about 2 years ago, and we were doing a big event there. We were in the auditorium, had a lot of different schools that had come in on a field trip for that day, and got done, left the event, go to the airport, fly to the next city. And as I turned my phone on when the plane landed, I had an email from a young man who'd been in attendance there that day. And in his email, he was just thanking me for my time, thanking me for coming to a school and sharing some ideas, some different things they could do to make their school a better place. And he ended his email with this line. He said, "You made me feel like I could do anything, and I'm just average." And on one hand, it's extremely humbling to know that something that I said could have that type of impact on a young man or a young woman. But on the other hand, it breaks my heart to know that that young man truly believed that he was just average. It breaks my heart to know that there are people that are out there watching this right now, both young and old alike, who believe that they're just average. There's not a single person out there that's watching this right now, y'all, that's just average. Every single one of you has your own unique skill sets and traits and personalities. And so that's what we're going to talk about here for just a little bit. There's not a single person that's watching this right now that's just average. Where does that mindset come from? Where does that mentality come from of I'm just? And I think a lot of it has to do with the way that we're raised. And it's not just a young people problem. This is of all generations that struggle with this concept. And I relate it back to my son, who is in the 5th grade now. But when he played baseball, when he was in Little League, 7 and 8 years old, every single time that a kid would strike out, somebody in the crowd was going to clap and yell and say, "It's okay. You'll get him next time." And understand me when I say this, I'm not saying that the world's going to end because an 8-year-old struck out in his Little League game. But that's the mentality that most of us are raised with. And then when we get out into the quote unquote real world and we really do have to face and handle failure, we don't know how to handle it. We don't know how to process that correctly. And understand me when I say this, young people, you're going to fail. You're going to fail over and over and over and over again in your lives. But so often what we see, what we look at, these celebrities and these artists and these people that we look up to, we see all these success stories that they have. We see all the great things that they post on social media. But what you don't see, what people don't post 99% of the time, are the failures that led to them getting to that point in their life. You're going to fail. I have failed so many times in my life on a personal level. I'm adopted. I'm divorced. I've totaled a vehicle. I've been fired from a job for standing up for what I believe in. In my senior year of college, I played baseball at Middle Tennessee State University. I was playing second base. We're winning the game 3-2. Runner on second, 2 outs, routine ground ball to me at second base. I fielded it and I threw it right in the dugout. Run scored, batter got to go to second. The next guy got a base hit. They won the game 4-3. We finished that season with a record of 42-17. We were 1 win shy of being the all-time winningest team in the history of Middle Tennessee State University baseball. You're going to fail. The question becomes, how do you handle that failure? And so I want to transition that thought into the difference between winners and losers, and how winners handle failure and how losers handle failure. Let's start out with losers here. Losers dwell on failures. They can't get over it. They can't stop thinking about it, and it hinders them. It slows them down. They can't move forward. They can't take more chances. They can't take risks because they're thinking about their previous failures. They dwell on those failures. And then the other thing that losers love to do is to make excuses. And I want you to think about this. Personal reflection and the group of people that you surround yourselves with. And we're going to talk a lot about that here for the next few minutes. And how often do you, or how often does somebody that you know make excuses? It's always somebody else's fault, right? It's always my teacher's fault. It was the principal's fault. It was the school district's fault. It's because of where I live. It's because of where I grew up. It's because of my parents or my lack thereof. It's because of the government. It's because of the president. It's because of fill in the blank, right? It's always somebody else's fault. Losers love to make excuses. Let me tell you, there's 2 groups of people that care about your excuses. One is your inner circle, those groups of people that love you and that are going to be there for you unconditionally. They'll listen to your excuses. And the other group of people that'll listen to your excuses are other people that make excuses too, because it helps them to justify in their minds the excuses that they're making as well. Hear me when I say this, y'all. You live the life that you create. I'm going to say that again. You live the life that you create. Nobody's going to hand it to you. Nobody's coming to make your bed, right? If you want it, you got to get up, you got to go out there, and you've got to go get it. Let's shift to winners now. And so we talked about losers dwell and make excuses. Winners use failure for reflection, and they learn from them, and they see their mistakes, and they see what they can do better, and they use that reflection to grow and to become better moving forward, better as individuals, better as human beings, better at whatever it is that we're talking about that they're going through, whether that's sports, whether it's leadership, whether it's being a friend, whatever the case may be. That's what winners do. And so when you think about that question, which one of those categories do you fall in? And listen, I understand being a teenager is hard, right? It's harder today to be a teenager than it's ever been in the history of ever. You guys have to deal with things and stress and pressure, things that I never even had to dream about back in my day when I was a teenager, right? In the chat box right now, I'd love to see, what are some of the things that stress you out? What are some of the things that are on your mind that weigh you down? Going on. I see work in there. I know that school's a big one. I see failure in there. I see college, how I'm going to get into college, my parents, SAT, ACT scores, scholarships, FAFSA, just life in general, right? With COVID and everything that's going on right now, you guys are under so much stress and so much pressure. And as we're talking about these things, and specifically, I want to focus in here on the college bound, the college answers on this thing. I want you to think about how much of that stress, how much of that pressure is created by things that are a result of comparison? How much of that stress, how many of those stressors are created by things that are completely out of your control and by living up to other people's expectations of yourself? And when I talk about comparison, I want you to think about how much time you spend right here on your cell phone, right? Because we spend hours every single day, and I do it too. You're consuming content. You're consuming other people's content and what they're doing and what they're saying and what they're wearing, what they're driving, all of those types of things. You're constantly consuming everybody else's content. Even the coolest kid, the quote unquote coolest kid on your campus spends hours of their day right here on their cell phone. And you're comparing the things that you have or the things that you don't have to those other people. And then I want you to think about living up to the expectations of others. And so many times when I'm working with young people, especially juniors and seniors, we start talking about, what do you want to do after high school? Where do you want to go to school and all that kind of stuff? And they're telling me about the school they want to go to. But then as we talk more and we get down to the root of that conversation, that's really not their dream school. Come to find out, a lot of times it's their mom's dream school or their dad's dream school or their grandparents' dream school for them, right? When you live your life for someone else, you are giving up the key to your happiness. And that's a difficult, but it is a powerful concept for you to grasp as young people. When you give up the key to your happiness, that leads to this thing called regret. And so I want you to really think about your hopes and your dreams and your goals that you have for your life. Are they really yours? Or are they something that a parent or that an adult supporter or that a teacher planted in your head? Because it's so important that you're chasing your dreams, not mine, not your teachers, not your moms, not your dads. You're chasing your dreams as you're moving forward. And so instead of comparison, my challenge for you is I want you to focus on personal accountability. I want you to focus on being the best version of you that you can be. And that includes, and it really starts with believing in yourself. Y'all, you have got to be your biggest fan. Right here between your ears, you have got to be your biggest fan. And understand me, that doesn't mean that I'm cocky. It doesn't mean that I'm arrogant. It doesn't mean that I'm walking around and I'm telling people about how great I am. But in my head, I have got to be my biggest cheerleader. I've got to be my biggest fan. Because if you don't believe in yourself, how am I supposed to believe in you? You've got to learn to have that self-confidence. That's the place where this entire thing is going to start, is with believing in yourself. I think another big part of this is cheering other people on during their journey. Okay. And understand this, success is not finite. There's not this small circle of success. And because I win means you lose. Because when your classmates wins means that you lose. Because when your teammates, whoever, means that you lose. I see it in high schools. I see it in middle schools. I see it in the corporate world as well. I would argue that the ugliest trait on the planet right now is jealousy. Because there's so many times when somebody is successful, when somebody is awarded, when somebody receives a recognition, and other people are jealous of the recognition that they're receiving. Don't be that person. Be that cheerleader. Cheer them on their journey. And you have to understand that their success doesn't equal failure for you. And at the end of the day, y'all, every single person on this planet, you, me, every single person, we want three things. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be loved. And I'll say that again. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be loved. What are you doing to see people? What are you doing to hear people? What are you doing to love people? That is what leadership is all about. And when we're talking about loving other people, we're talking about pouring our heart into other people. Understand this: you can't love others with a broken heart. And so what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to make sure that your heart is full? What are you doing to make sure that your tank is filled up? Because that's so important, especially right now in light of everything that's gone on in our country here in the last 9 months with this pandemic. And so just some of the things that I do for myself on a personal level, every single month, I have something that's built into my calendar that's just for me. Maybe it's a trip to go somewhere. My favorite place on the planet is Disney World. Maybe it's just to go hiking. Maybe it's just to go kayaking. Maybe it's to go for a walk, whatever the case may be. But I have something every single month built into my calendar that's just for me. Now, right now, with as crazy and as tough as everything is, maybe it needs to be more frequent than that. Maybe it needs to be once a week. Maybe it needs to be every single day. But intentionally build in 15 to 20 minutes into your calendar every single day that's just for you, to do whatever it is that you like to do. Sit in silence and meditate, jam your favorite tunes, whatever the case may be, but build in that time every single day that is literally just for you. Some of you guys need to take a digital detox. And we talked earlier about how much time we spend on our phones each and every single day consuming other people's content. And for some of you, it'd be a great idea just to step away from that stuff altogether. I know some young people that have deleted apps all the way up completely off their phone. Now, if you have FOMO, right, let's at least limit that time. And let's limit it to 30 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever it is that works for you, but limit that intake. There's so much negativity on your feeds right now. It's just constant negativity, and that stuff can't help but creep into your head. So for a lot of you, a great idea would be a digital detox. Then I want you to think about your inner circle. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the people that you surround yourselves with, your core group of friends, are they your biggest cheerleaders? Are they your biggest fans? When you're successful, are they genuinely happy for you, or are they jealous, right? Do they make you and push you and encourage you to be a better person, or do they not? And I want you to really take some serious time to think about those questions and to think about that friend group, because if they're not your biggest fans, if they're not supporting you, if they're not encouraging you and cheering you on for your success in your life, then it's time to make some cuts, y'all. It's time to make some edits. It's time to surround yourself with people that are going to put you on that path to success. My buddy Aaron Davis lives in Nebraska, and he always says, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future." And I just love that quote, because I think that 95% of the time, it's so true. You made me feel like I could do anything, and I'm just average. I want you to think about how many times you've said those two words in the middle of that phrase, "I'm just," because I know that I've said it numerous times. I'm just a guy, I'm just a girl, I'm just a kid, I'm just from this school, or I'm just from this town, I'm just going to a junior college or community college, I'm just going to be a whatever career it is that you want to be. I'm just. Not a single one of you on this call right now are just anything. Every single one of you has your own unique talents and skill sets and abilities and quirks and personality and scars that make you exactly who you are. And hear me when I say this, y'all. Your perfection lies in what makes you unique. There's not a single person on this call right now that's just anything. You got to be your biggest fan. When we're talking about mental health, we're talking about coping strategies. Let's start right there. Let's shift now. Let's talk about time management. And this is a concept that, again, young people struggle with it, old people struggle with it, everybody in between struggles with time management. And I want you to think about how many times, and I've said it too, how many times have you used the phrase, "I don't have time," or "I didn't have enough time," right? You've said it, I've said it, we all, if I just had a few more hours in the day, right? So many times that we use that phrase. And I'm going to challenge you on that phrase. And I want you to challenge your thinking moving forward. I want to challenge you to change one word. And instead of saying "I don't have time," I want you to say "I didn't make time." because you make the time for the things that you value. Changing that one word, it can completely change your mindset. It's not that I didn't have time, it's that I didn't make time, because again, you make the time for the things that you value. From a business, from a school district perspective, they spend money on the things that they value. So a school district might spend money on professional development for their staff members, on their transportation, on their technology, on their infrastructure. Those are the things that a school district values. As individuals, you spend your time in the areas that you value. Now, in the chat box right now, I want to hear from you all. What are some things that you value in your life? What are the most important aspects in your life? I see family popping in there. I see life. I see your dog, pets are like family members, basically, right? Your hobbies, family and friends, those healthy relationships. I love that. Very cool. A lot of different stuff there. Family and health, yourself, business, family, friends, sports, great. Awesome. Great. Self-care. I love that one there as well. Now, let's shift from the things that you value to on a typical day outside of school, because I know that everybody spends time with school, but on a typical day, where do you actually spend your time? What are things that take up your time on a typical day? I see work, I see sports, I see art, I see the gym, I see soccer. I know that social media is a big one there with TikTok and all that good stuff. Netflix, I got Netflix fans out there, right? Doing homework, a lot of different things so there we go, tutoring, great list. YouTube, watching YouTube videos, that sounds like my son, anime, all kinds of stuff. So the things that we value versus where we actually spend our time. Now, we're gonna use those here in this example. I've got two canisters here. I'm gonna try to hold this jar in front of me so that you can see it here with my virtual background. Both of the canisters had the exact same number of ingredients, the exact same amount of ingredients. And so in this canister at the top, I've got some big rocks. And then in the middle, I've got some smaller rocks. And then down at the bottom, I've got sand. And so let's talk about what these three ingredients represent in this canister here. Let's start out with the big rocks. And these big rocks represent those things that are truly important in your life, those things that you value in your life. And you guys listed a lot of great ones there with your family, with your religion, if you're a religious type person, your faith, those types of things, with those healthy relationships, with self-care, with your personal identity. Those are all big rocks. Those middle rocks there, those are things that are important in your life, but if you didn't have them, like, the world's not going to end, right? So let's think about things from the smaller rock perspective. Maybe you've got a part-time job. Maybe you're members of the sports team. Maybe you're in extracurricular activities. Maybe my seniors, you love to spend time focused on planning your senior trip and going to your senior prom and all those types of things. Those will be represented by the middle rocks. The sand down there at the bottom, those are things that are by and large trivial in our life. Some of them are nice to have as fillers, but a lot of them are just trivial in the big scheme of things. So things like, I see somebody enjoys playing 2K21 on next gen. So your video games would definitely be in the sand. Text messages, social media notifications. We talked about cell phone and how much time you spend on cell phones earlier. That would definitely be in the sand there. We talked about video games, material possessions, the things that you're wearing and the watches and purses and all those types of things. Netflix would definitely be in the sand. And then something that high school kids and that middle school kids are super, super caught up in 90% of the time is drama. The he said, she said, he did this, she did that, the drama that goes along with high school and middle school. That is definitely in the sand category as well. Now, I told you I had two canisters. And so in this canister, I filled this one up first, and I started out with the sand. I started out with those things that are largely unimportant in my life. So the video game, so the drama, so the Netflix, so the text messages, the social media type things. And then from there, I put in those smaller rocks, those things that are nice to have, but the world isn't going to end if I don't have them, right? So things like my part-time job, my sports team, my extracurriculars, senior trip, those types of things. And then at the top, I started filling that one in with my big rocks, those things that are super important, my values in my life, my major values in my life. So my family, my healthy relationships with my friends, your faith, if you're a religious person out there, those types of things, those big rocks. But what you can't see is that in this canister, I had another handful of rocks that I couldn't fit into this canister without it flowing over the top. Another handful of those big things that are truly important in your life. Now in this other canister, I filled this one up, the exact same number of ingredients, but I filled this one up in the opposite order. And I put those big rocks in first, those things that are truly important, my family, my self-care, my personal identity, those healthy relationships, I put those in first. And then after that, I put the medium-sized rocks on top of that. Those things that are nice to have, my part-time job, my sports teams, my extracurriculars. And then after that, I still had room to put that sand in there of those things that I like to do, but are largely trivial in the big scheme of things, right? So playing those video games, spending some time on social media to follow, see what my friends are up to, see what my favorite band's up to, those types of things, right? And in this canister, every single ingredient fit. But in the other canister, I didn't have enough room. So I want you to think about which one of those canisters represents you, both as an individual and as a leader. And if your life looks more like that first canister, what can you do to make it look more like the second canister? And then from a leadership perspective, from a leadership group perspective, which one of those canisters best describes you from that angle? Which one of those canisters best describes your leadership group from that angle? And what would those ingredients represent as leaders on your campus? And so many times, and this is everywhere I go, not just in the United States, but in Europe, everywhere that you go, leadership kids are so caught up in dress up days and homecoming week and spirit days and homecoming dances and all that good stuff. And y'all, that has a place, but that's not leadership, man. Those are definitely not big rocks when we're talking about leadership and being leaders as groups. To me, what do those big rocks represent? To me, they represent ensuring that every single kid on your campus feels seen and heard and loved. That's a big rock, y'all. It's creating a culture of kindness and creating a culture of empathy. Those are big rocks. It's creating an environment where everyone is accepted for who they are. Those are big rocks. And so again, I challenge you both on a personal, individual level, and then as a leader and as a leadership group, which one of those canisters best describes you and best describes your leadership group on your campus? And what can you do to make sure that your canister is the one that's mixed correctly, right? Versus the one that doesn't have enough space in it. Talking about time management there. People talk all the time about thinking outside the box, right? And that's like a cliche that everybody uses. And my whole take on that is this, y'all, let's blow the stupid box up. So many things that we do in life and in leadership, and in particular in our world of education, are because that's the way that it's always been done. And y'all, that is the fastest path to mediocrity that you can ever travel. And I used to love asking my kids this in class, and now I get to have this conversation with young people all around the globe. I love asking the question, what's your why? And I don't mean like why you wake up in the morning, what makes your heart beat a little faster, but whatever your opinions are on whatever topic it is that we're talking about, why do you believe the things that you believe? Because so often, so many of us, myself included, we're raised and we live in these little bitty boxes, and the things that we think, the things that we believe is because that's what our parents think. That's what our group of friends thinks. And we really can't rationalize, we really can't justify why it is we have the opinions that we do. And so when you turn 16, the rite of passage is you get your driver's license, get your first car, right? And when I turned 16, way back in the day, got my driver's license that year, but I didn't get a car that first year. I didn't grow up like poor by any stretch of the imagination, but I was far from being affluent either, and just couldn't afford to get a car that first year. And so I had to wait until I was 17 to get my first car. And when we did, we paid $1,200 for it. It was a 1983 Subaru hatchback. It was white, had cloth seats, had a cassette deck player in there so I could play my Snoop Dogg, right? Had some 8 balls hanging down from the mirror, like it was pimped out, y'all. And like the worst part about this car were the brakes on it. And they worked, but they made the most god-awful noise that you have ever heard in your entire life. So when I'm pulling up to an intersection, stoplight, stop sign, whatever, it was like, wah, wah, wah. It was horrible and so embarrassing to a 17-year-old dude, like trying to find his way in the world, right? And so I want you to think about the way that you look at other people. And for those of you that are old enough to drive, the way that people look at you when you're driving down the road. Because this funny thing happened when I graduated from high school and I got a new car. I got a 1998 Jeep Wrangler. It was hunter green, tan top, roll bar, CD player, which was a major upgrade at the time. Big tires jacked out to the side. I mean, that thing was tight, y'all. And so then when I was pulling up to those intersections, when I was pulling up to those stoplights, those stop signs, the looks that you would get from people, they were a whole lot different than the looks that I got when I was driving that 1983 Subaru hatchback. Graduated from high school, I went to college. Started out college, I was an engineering major, didn't like that. And then I went to commercial real estate. I didn't really like that either. And then I ended up graduating with my undergraduate degree in agriculture. Specifically, it was in agribusiness. And so there were a lot of days on campus when I would have my blue jeans on, I had my belt buckle on, I had my boots on. And as long as I was in an ag building, y'all, I was fine. But when I stepped outside that building to walk across campus, the looks that you would get from other people, and they didn't have to say anything. They never did. But you could see it on their face what it was that they were thinking. Look at that boy right there. He probably ain't too bright, but I bet you he could rope him a calf in no time. That's a stereotype that goes with it, right? But then other days on campus, I'd throw my baseball jacket on. And all of a sudden, I was an athlete. And all of a sudden, people look at you different then, don't they? What's your why? Why do we do that? We look at people, we look at how they dress, how they wear their hair, the shoes they wear, the car they drive, or what they get dropped off in at school, the neighborhoods where they live, where they go to church, or if they go to church, and then we judge them and then we treat them accordingly. What's your why? Same good looking dude in the 1983 Subaru hatchback that was in the 1998 Jeep Wrangler. Same exact dude wearing a belt buckle that was wearing a baseball jacket, but totally different ways that we get treated by society. What's your why? I think a huge part of leadership, and I preach this to my kids, I preach it to my son, I preach it to myself every single day. I think a huge part of leadership is putting yourself in a position to be successful every single day. What are you doing to put yourself in a position to be successful? And then if you want to be a great leader, part of being a great leader is once you put yourself in a position to be successful, then you put other people in a position to be successful as well. That is a huge step of being a great leader. And what is success? It's one of my favorite things to talk about, especially with young people. And the cool thing to me about success, we all have our own ideas. We all have our own definitions of what success is to each and every single one of us. And I just think that that's so cool because my hopes and my dreams and my goals are totally different than anybody else that's on this call right now. Now, if we lived in a perfect world, we would all have the same starting line. Right? We would all start from right here. And if we lived in a perfect world, we would all have the same finish line. And if we could get to that finish line, that would mean that we were successful. But do we live in a perfect world? Not by a long shot, right? And the truth is, if this is my starting line, do I get to start a little bit further ahead of that line because I'm a man? A lot of times, yes, I do. Did I get to start a little bit further ahead of that line because I was an athlete? A lot of times, yes, I did. Do I get to start a little bit further ahead of that line because I'm white? A lot of times, yes, I do. Now, is that fair? Not by a long shot. But is that reality of the world that we're living in right now in December of 2020? Yes, it is. Now, there are some people that have to start from way behind that starting line because of reasons that are completely out of their control. And is that fair? Absolutely not. But does that mean that I'm going to quit and I'm going to give up? Zero chance. Does it mean that I have to work a little bit harder, sometimes a lot harder to get to that finish line? Yes, it does. But when you get there, is that success going to taste a whole lot sweeter than the kid that got everything handed to him? Better believe that it will, y'all. Every single day when you wake up, you've got a choice. You can choose to be a champion. You can choose to be a victim. I'm going to say that again. Every single morning you wake up, you can choose to be a champion. You can choose to be a victim. My hope, my goal, my plead with every single one of you watching this right now, every single day when you wake up, you choose to be a champion. And then you use your leadership skills, your talents, your abilities to empower other people around you to be champions as well. That's what leadership is all about, y'all. I want to ask you this question, and I know that some of you you may be in person, you may be virtual, you may be hybrid. How many ghosts exist on your campus? How many kids believe that nobody has any idea whether they're there or whether they're not every single day? That if they didn't come to school, if they don't log on to the Zoom or the Google Classroom, however it is that your school's doing school right now, if they just stop showing up, then nobody would even notice. How many ghosts exist on your campus? And then the most important question that I'm going to ask you this entire day is this: what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do for those kids that feel like nobody sees them and nobody hears them and nobody loves them? I talked earlier about leadership, and so many times leadership kids are caught up in homecoming week and spirit days and dress up days and this and that and the dance and all that good stuff. And those things are fun. Like, don't get me wrong, y'all. Those things are fun, but that's not leadership, man. Right? I wrote a book and it's called I See You, I Hear You, and I Love You. And on the front cover of this book is one of the young men that I had the honor of serving as his teacher. His name's Eddie. And Eddie and his brother lived a horrible, horrible, horrible home life that I really can't even put into words to you all, the things that they had to endure. No human being should ever have to live in the circumstances that those two kiddos had to grow up in. Eddie only knew that he was going to eat when he came to school because he knew he was going to have free breakfast and he was going to have free lunch. And beyond that, he didn't know where his next meal was going to come from. When Eddie left school every afternoon, he didn't know if he was going to go home to find themselves evicted again. Do you think that Eddie cared about Disney Day during dress up week? He don't care anything about that, y'all. What does Eddie care about? Eddie cares that somebody saw him. Eddie wanted to be heard. Eddie wanted to be loved. Eddie wanted somebody to take the time to realize that he was a student on that campus and to spend some time getting to know him and caring about him and help him to figure out what are your dreams and what can we do to put you on a position? What can we do to put you on that road to be successful? That's what leadership is about, y'all. Leadership's about human connection. It's about kindness. It's about empathy. It's about creating a safe place where everyone feels valued, right? It's about inspiring the hopeless and empowering the dreamers. That is what leadership is all about, man. Our world today, our country in particular, is filled with so much hatred, so much anger, so much division. It's everywhere you look. You're either sitting on this side of the fence or you're sitting on that side of the fence. And if I'm sitting over here, I have to hate the people who are over there. And if I'm sitting over here, I have to hate the people who are over there. And there is no middle ground. And y'all, that drives me absolutely insane. There's a billboard that was up in my hometown for a number of years. I don't even know, 3 years, 4 years, something. It was crazy. Had a Bible verse up there. And it said something along the lines of, a man shall not lie with another man. And understand me when I say this. I don't care what your opinion is on sexual preference. I don't care what your opinion is on gun control or on politics or on religion, because that's not how I judge who you are as a person. But I can tell you this. There is not a single one of my friends who belonged to that community who drove past that billboard and looked up there at it and said, I don't think I'm going to be gay anymore. There's not a single one. There's not a single person I know that has ever read a tweet, that has ever seen a post on Facebook or Instagram or Snap or TikTok, that's ever read a newspaper article or a magazine article that's read it and was like, I think I'm going to change my mind. I think I'm going to vote the other way now. I think I'm going to think the other way now, right? All of those things do, y'all, are further contribute to this hatred and this anger and this division that we have going on in our country right now. I try to run every day. It's kind of my me time where I can think about whatever it is that I want to think about, problem solve. Sometimes just like think about nothing, right? And just kind of just get away from everything. But I try to run every single day. And I was running in my hometown of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is a little bit south of Nashville. It's where I grew up, where my parents still live. They've got a super cool greenway system. And I'm running down this greenway system, and I looked over at the wall, and it was tagged with graffiti. And I just stopped. And I was like, dude, that is so sick. It was one of those things, it's always been right in front of my face, but I never thought about it from that perspective. And I would love to know, I would love to have a conversation with the young man, the young woman that tagged it up there, just to know, like, what was the story? What was the message that they were trying to convey, right? Because you have to understand this, y'all. Every single one of us on this call right now, we're all agents of change. We're all trying to lead this revolution, right? But here's the key. You can't lead a revolution without love. And I saw that tag there on that wall, and I just thought to myself, that is so perfect. And so the next time that you find yourself in one of these negative conversations, the next time that you find yourself about to like something and share something or retweet something on social media, I want you to do me a favor. And I want you to think about this picture that's on my background now. And I want you to ask yourself, are you spreading a message of hate and of anger and of division? Or are you spreading a message of love and of hope and of understanding? Because in my experience, y'all, love wins. Every single time, love wins. We're on this call today because every single one of you are leaders on your campus. And what is leadership? And that's the whole topic of the whole day. And I'm super excited to listen to some other amazing speakers that are coming up here after me. And I'm excited to hang out and get to spend some time listening to their stories and their passion as well, and what they have to say about leadership. And I think one of the greatest things that you can do as a leader, when we're talking about inspiring the hopeless, empower the dreamers, one of the greatest things that you can do in anyone's life is if you can move them by 3 inches. And I mean that literally, 3 inches. A few years back, I had a young man, he transferred into my school during the middle of the school year. His name was Cordell. And Cordell was a tall, skinny kid. He had big monster gauges in his ears. And you could tell just by looking at Cordell, he wasn't really going to fit in with the cool kids on campus. Cordell was a senior. He was up to date on all of his credits. And so he qualified for a class that we offered called Senior Project. And during Senior Project, my kids could leave campus for a block and they could work for a business, or they could stay on campus for that block and they could work for a teacher. Well, Cordell was new to town. He didn't know anybody. I taught Senior Project at the time. And so when he came down there to get his paperwork, he was like, yo, dude, you mind if I just stay in here for Senior Project? I'm like, for sure, dude, let's kick it, right? And so every day he would come into my classroom and sit in the far back right corner with his headphones on. And I know that he just wanted to be left alone. But every single day I would go just a bebopping back there trying to talk to him. And I'm sure he was like, why does this weird dude keep coming back here? But I knew that I just had to move Cordell about 3 inches. He'd been in my class for about a week and all of a sudden he stopped showing up. And I lived in a very transient community, Portland, Tennessee. The socioeconomic conditions there are not the greatest, to say the least. And so it's not unusual for my kids to just kind of disappear sometimes. People come and go all the time. And I didn't make the time to go down to our counseling office to check on his individual situation. I just made assumptions about that young man. He'd been gone from my class for quite a few days. One afternoon, I was driving home from school and I saw Cordell walking down the sidewalk with his backpack on. And so he'd been at school that day, but he hadn't been in my class. The young educator in me, when I first got into this profession, I was all about rules and structure and discipline and seating charts, no food, no drinks, no cell phones, those fun things that your teachers like to do sometimes, right? And I would have made an example out of that kid. I would have blown that kid up, man. But the Renaissance educator in me knew I just had to move Cordell by 3 inches. I stopped, I pulled over, I picked him up. I said, dude, man, let me give you a ride home, man. And so we hopped in, and I didn't ask him about class. We didn't talk about school. We didn't talk about any of those things. We just kind of talked about life and about music and about his favorite band. And then I dropped him off at his house. And so this repeated itself for a couple of afternoons. And finally, one afternoon, we're driving home. I said, Cordell, listen to me, buddy. I'm not mad at you. You're not in trouble. You're not any of those things. I just need to know what you're doing during Senior Project, boss. Like, you're going down to the gym to shoot ball. You going to another teacher's classroom. Like, what are you doing during Senior Project? And he paused, one of those awkward moments of silence that feels like it takes forever. And then he finally answered and he said, PC, I didn't think I could tell anybody this, but my mom is a meth addict and she's recently relapsed. And so what that young man was doing every single day when Senior Project started, he was walking home because he had figured out that we didn't take attendance during that class. It was an honor system type thing. So he was walking home to check on his mom to make sure that she was still alive, to make sure that she hadn't overdosed from the night before. And then he was walking back to campus that afternoon to take the rest of his core academic classes. And you talk about just kicking me right in the gut, right? Because so often as educators and as adults, and especially as administrators, when we're dealing with discipline, we want things to be black and white. But the truth is, and you guys know this, our kids, you guys, you live in so many different shades of gray that most of us can't even fathom, y'all. So the last time that I ever got to see Cordell walking, he had on a purple graduation gown and a purple graduation cap. And he got to walk across our stage and shake our principal's hand and get his diploma. And at the end of that ceremony, he got to move his tassel by 3 inches from here to here. Now, does that take away the circumstances that young man has to go home to every night? Not by a long shot. But does it give him hope for a better tomorrow? You better believe that it does, y'all. Inspire the hopeless, empower the dreamers. That, to me, is what leadership is all about. Again, I want to say thank you to Charisse and her entire staff for the opportunity to spend some time with you guys here today. This virtual world, it is crazy, y'all. So I've got a favor to ask of you, if you don't mind. This is my social media contact information here. It would mean the absolute world to me. You can see me, but I can't see you. It would mean the absolute world to me if you would take a selfie or a group shot. If you're in a group, I don't have any idea how you guys are watching today, but how you're watching, and then post it on social media, put it in your Instagram story. I'll pop it on mine. But that would mean the world to me to get to be able to see some of your faces. We've got, I think, about 5 minutes now with Jada. And so she's going to come back on. And if any of you guys have questions, if there's something that I can do to help out, this is the time right now. Hit me up and let's roll through some questions, y'all.
Thank you, Phil Campbell. That was awesome. If anybody has questions, you can type them in the Q&A because I'll be able to read them better than in the chat because the chat is just jumping today. So if anybody has questions, you could just type it in there and then I'll ask. Oh, okay. So the first question, PC, is, sorry if I mess up your guys' names. It's from Tiana Lee Felix. And she said, where can I find the book?
Oh, great question, Tiana. So you can find it on Amazon. And if you just search for it's titled I See You, I Hear You, and I Love You. And I actually ship them. My son is my warehouse worker. But if you order one right now or today or whenever, I'll sign it for you too before I put it in the mail for you. That'd be awesome. And all of the proceeds from that book, I didn't talk about that. Every single penny raised from the sale of that book goes to benefit the Chase Your Dreams Foundation, which is my nonprofit organization that I have to benefit at-risk youth and their families. So every single penny of the proceeds goes directly to, during this pandemic, we've donated over $10,000 to help to feed and for hygiene products for kids that are less fortunate.
Thank you. The next question is from Sydney Beaton, and she said, what keeps you going in life?
Oh man, that's a great question. What keeps you going in life? That's like $1 million question. If I had a great answer to that, I could write another book to that. I want to be the best. Like that drives me. And again, I don't say that like in a cocky way, in an arrogant way or whatever. But I'm a firm believer that if you're going to do something, you go all in, right? And you be the absolute best that you can be. I played baseball all the way through college. And I can honestly say that from the time I was 5 years old until the time I was 22 years old in my baseball career, there wasn't a single day that I took a lazy step on a baseball field, right? During practice, during BP, during games, like there wasn't a single time that I ever took a lazy step out there. I think it comes down to your work ethic, right? And how bad do you want it? And that's something I like to talk about with young people as well, is how bad do you want it? Because if I talk to every single one of you, there's 420 something people on this call right now. Every single one of you are going to tell me that you want to be great, right? Every single one of you wants to be legendary. But the difference between being good, between being average and being great is your work ethic. And are you willing to grind? Are you willing to put in the extra hours and the time to get to that next level? And so I would say for me, that's what motivates me. And I've got my own personal hopes and like my ultimate goal. I want to have a log cabin out in the middle of nowhere, right? Where I can like walk outside. I don't see a neighbor. I don't see nothing against people, but like, I'm not a huge like people person. But like, that's when I get there, I'm gonna be like, yes, like life is good for me right now. So that's something, again, I'm always looking forward to something, whether that's a trip, whether it's a long-term, like the log cabin type thing, but those are the things that motivate me.
So I don't know how much more time we have, but I'm going to group some of the questions together. A lot of people are asking, what's the best way, the greatest way to make people be seen and kind of form that human connection. And then also just a side note, people just want you to move to the side so they could see your full social media handle and follow you.
Gotcha. It's hard. The sun has come up, and so I've got this weird window blind. So if I put my hand, or you can kind of see the sunlight going through there. So there you go. And I can pop it in the chat. It's just literally at Dr. Phil Campbell on there for that. How do you see people? I think you have to be intentional about the entire thing. And it's being intentional to get to know other people, not to share what you're passionate about. Leadership kids we love. We want to tell them about our events and all the cool things and the great things that we're doing. We want them to come to our stuff. But what are we doing to see other people? And being intentional about that. I talked about social media, and a lot of things on social media are negative, but what if we flip the script on that? It takes 30 seconds for me to put, I love your outfit, or I love your hair, or that's a cool car, or you crushed the game last night. You're like, whatever. It takes 30 seconds to put a positive comment on there, right? It takes 30 seconds to slide into somebody's DMs in a positive way, right? And say, hey, Jada, I'm PC. I know that we go to school together, but we've never really talked before. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you like to do? Hope you're having a great school year. If there's something I can do to help out, let me know, right? That's leadership. So I think you just have to be very intentional about it, especially right now in light of, are most of you virtual for school, like completely going to school from home, Jada? Yeah. So I think social media is huge because that's where the world is right now, right? Like this is the biggest, even without being virtual, that's where the world is. Like Everybody talks about TV and TV commercials, some channels 2, 4, CBS and NBC. Like, it's not about that anymore. It's about Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. Like, that's where the attention is. And so what are we doing to put a positive twist on that? I think that's a huge place where you can start to really see people. And I would encourage you, challenge you to interact and to meet people, to see people that don't look like you. They don't look like you, they don't talk like you, they don't run in your circles. And that's hard to do because that's scary for a lot of people, right? Because we're scared of things and we're scared of people that don't look the exact same way that we do. And so I would encourage you, I would challenge you as leaders, let's start to get to know some people that don't look the exact same way that you do.
Thank you for all that, all the motivation, inspiration, all the encouraging words, Dr. Phil Campbell. It was awesome to hear from you. And now we have some other awesome speakers. I tried to get most of the questions out there. I know there's a few left, but if you want to look in the Q&A, I'm pretty sure you can answer them through there.
You got it, for sure. And hit me up on Insta, like shoot me questions. I'll answer every single one of them, I promise. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So now I'm just going to introduce Amanda Pickett. Amanda Pickett is a certified school social worker and an associate education consultant in the Department of Education. She has a variety of experiences in mental and behavior health and led the integration of mental health in school service delivery models. She has a decade of experience working with children, families, schools, and communities. She is passionate about supporting schools and leaders around making schools a collaborative place for all, intentional about social justice and racial equality and supporting outcomes for all. Amanda is an endorsed PBIS trainer and courageous conversions about affiliate and a licensed restorative practices trainer. She's an avid proponent of collaboration and bringing multiple voices and perspectives to the table. Let's give a warm welcome to Amanda Pickett.
Thank you, Jada, and thank you all. I'm a little nervous after going to PC. What a great job and what a great message this morning. And I'm really hoping to build on what was shared already. So I'm excited to be part of this. For over 8 years now, I've been working primarily with teachers, school leaders, and staff, and I miss youth. So I'm so excited to be part of this. I really wish that I could see you all, but I see the chat box, so I really appreciate that. So as we go along, please continue to participate in the chat and ask your questions. That's a way to let me know how I'm doing and kind of the needs that you all have for this session. So you heard a little bit about me. That sounded like really official, so I apologize about that. But I want to make a couple things clear for you all. I'm a mom and I'm a continuous learner. Something that I've been spending the last 8 years doing a lot of reflecting on, reading on, conversing about is community. How do we create it? How do we repair it? How do we build it? But even more importantly, how does race and culture impact it? So I'm going to be vulnerable here with you all today. I'm a facilitator. I'm not an expert. I'm going to be real, honest. I make mistakes, and I'm working harder each day to be more explicit about things that I value, which includes equity. I need to honor that I'm a white woman, so I enter this conversation from that. I'm also a mom of 2 biracial children, and I'm navigating raising brown children in today's society. With that in mind, and as we get into the next section that we're going to focus on, I'm going to stop and pause for a moment. I want us all to reflect on the past 7 months since George Floyd was murdered. What was your immediate reaction? What did you say to others? What did you do? What should you be continuing to do? How have you stepped up as a leader to dismantle racism? In order for a system that has been perpetuated for over 400 years to be broken, it's going to take you, leaders of today and our future, to be intentional. So I'm going to start today with a small but important first step: conversations. Uncomfortable, real, honest, difficult ones about personal experiences, identity, culture, and how it impacts us as leaders and as community members. So I'm going to set a couple ground rules for our conversation today. So this is a protocol that I use. Oops. Sorry, there was sound coming in that I use in guiding some conversation. It allows us to be personally mindful of how we're showing up and to think about where others might be showing up. I think it connects to what PC was mentioning about how we can meet in the middle and have more productive conversations, not based in hatred or judgment, but instead seeking to understand. So I want to be clear that talking about race is not racism, and we need to be examining, reflecting, and critically interrupting. So what are these agreements that we're going to make? And these are agreements that you can take back with you in your school communities, in your personal life, to help guide conversations. So the first one is to stay engaged. I'm going to ask you to be present, to put away the distractions as much as you can, participate in the chat like you have been, any activities, and to stick with me even if it gets uncomfortable, which leads to experiencing discomfort. It's okay if you get uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable in this conversation is a normal response. This is not meant to shame anybody or make anybody feel bad, but to have a dialogue about things that we don't usually talk about. I want you to speak your truth, share your experiences. Notice how others are the same or different. Focus on what's personal, local, and immediate to you. This is not the time to tell other stories. And the last one is expect and accept non-closure. We're not going to solve everything today. And I am going to promise you that not everything's going to be tied up in a nice little bow, but that's okay. This is going to lead us to know what we need to pick up and keep moving with. So in the chat box, I'd like you guys to kind of pause for a moment, and which one of these agreements will be most difficult for you? And you can add why, but which one of these is going to be hard to do? Speaking my truth, experiencing discomfort. So those are all typical responses. We each come in with our own kind of which one is more challenging for us. I want you to be mindful of that and push yourself that even if it's uncomfortable or it feels unnatural to you, to stick with it and to carry on. So as a leader, we need to always have a goal in mind. What are we working towards? I want you to be thinking about what are your goals? What are the outcomes? And how are you getting there? It's incredible, excuse me, it's critical that when we embark on these journeys of social justice or racial equity, that we understand the language that we're using and the ultimate outcome that we're working towards. So you've seen this graphic. You might have seen a different one of a baseball field. I personally like this one a little bit better because it adds a fourth piece. But this graphic depicts 4 concepts. The first one is in your top left screen, which is inequality. So there's unequal access. You see one of the little boys getting the apple and the other one not getting it. Top right is equality. Everybody's getting the same thing. Notice that they each have the same ladder, yet they're not both getting apples. Bottom left is equity. Everyone's getting what they need. The person on the right has a taller ladder now, and he's also getting the apples. But the bottom right is justice. This is removal of the systemic barrier so that everybody can access and participate just as they are. Here we're intentionally, from the get-go, setting up our homes, our communities, our schools, our after-school programs, our sports teams, with the unique needs of those in mind. That we shouldn't need to retrofit things, that we're actually thinking about people as we're setting them up. So I want you to pause. Where are you? Where's your school? Where's your community? What's the mindsets of your friends, your family? And you can feel free to share any of these reflections in the chat box, but just think about kind of where are you and how do you get to that last box of justice? So I want to thank PC. So much of what we spoke, what he spoke about connects to what we're getting into: identity, values, how you spend your time. So we're going to go deep into identity. Who are you? In order to be your best version of yourself, like PC mentioned, you need to know who you are. So we're going to watch a small portion of this clip. Unfortunately, I can't share the whole thing, but I do encourage you to go back and watch the whole thing. I'll drop the YouTube clip in the chat box so you can go back. It's Recognizing Privilege by Michael Yates. I want you to keep this clip in mind and reflect on your privileges, how you're building up other people's knapsacks. So how are you inspiring the dreamers? How are you building up their identities and finding strengths? And how does this connect to leadership? So let's make sure I do this correctly. All right.
Between you and the person you're sitting next to. So let's do this thing. Let's do this experiment right now. Everyone imagine that you're playing a card game. And you don't know the rules to this card game. At the table where you're sitting, nobody's speaking, but everybody knows the game. They're putting down cards, they're scoring points. And every time you try to ask for the rules, you're scolded. And then there's some annoying dude at the end of the table who writes something that you can't read on a sticky note. Frustrated, you make it through the game. And you get to the end of the round and you lose. Chances are if you played that game 1,000 times, you would lose every single time. You didn't know the rules. It would be easier if somebody just told you what the unspoken and unwritten rules of the game were. You may have just experienced your first or your 100th time feeling what marginalization feels like. If this is your first time with marginalization, it's safe to say that you live a privileged life. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not going to attack you. Privilege is powerful when you use it to uplift those around you. If you are all too familiar with what it's like to feel marginalized, then you don't have privilege. But you're not helpless either. We can teach you to claim power for yourself and over your identities. So let's do that now. I like to use in my classroom, and we're going to use today, Peggy McIntosh's invisible backpack. Imagine that you're holding a backpack, and I want you to actually hold the backpack. Remember, I told you you're going home with something today. Right now, the backpack is empty, but we're about to fill it up. Inside of this invisible backpack, you are going to fill it with all of the positive aspects of your identity. If you can walk, you have power. Put that in your backpack. If you speak English in the United States of America, you have power. Put that in your backpack. If you speak multiple languages, you have power. Put that in your backpack. If you have access to education, you have power. Put that in your backpack. If you have somebody at home who cares about you, you have power. Put that in your backpack. Find all of the positive identities about yourself. Even identify the ones that you think are negative, view them in a different way, put them in that backpack. You carry that backpack around with you proudly everywhere you go because that's not just who you are. It's the best of who you are. You see, once we transform our mindsets about who we are, we can start accurately thinking about our neighbor for who they are. The last step in this process is kind of like Facebook, and I realize my students tell me that I'm getting old because I don't use Snapchat and Instagram, but this one's like Facebook. So if you don't use Facebook, get one. On Facebook, you like things, you comment, and you share them. That's what we've got to do with this message. The more people we reach with this message, the better. A student of mine likened this to being unplugged from the matrix. Y'all, we have to unplug some more people. Consider this. In this room right now, there are so many gaps. And in those gaps, misunderstandings and preconceived notions wait to separate us from one another. But they don't have to. Now, there's obviously a gap amongst the privileged and the underprivileged in terms of access. There's a gap between how those two groups relate to one another. There's a gap even within our individual selves concerning the power that we think we have and the power that we actually have. You see, understanding that by claiming aspects of our identity as powerful, we can close those gaps, which means that when we face underprivileged situations, they're not actually underprivileged because we are powerful and powerful people overcome. Now is the time that this room becomes like the Oprah Winfrey Show. See, because you got some power in the front. And you got some power in that striped shirt. And in the middle, you got some power. And in the back, you get some power. And look under your seats, you got some power. And all the way in the hallway, you got some power. Everybody's going home with some power.
Awesome. So as I'm switching screens, feel free in the chat to share any of your reactions or connections that you're making to that clip. As now I am struggling. I'm going to share. There we go. All right. People got power. Awesome. Energy is amazing from that speaker. And yes, recognizing what we have and how to make things in a positive. So turning those negatives to a positive. So important. So as a leader, self-awareness is key. You need to know who you are and the lens that you bring into the space that you're entering. Self-awareness is grounded in identifying emotions. being able to identify it and have strong vocabulary around it. So we need to examine our own identity. What are important aspects of your identity? We each have unique stories, histories, and experiences that inform our perspective. Accurate self-perception may be challenging to achieve, yet there are tools and resources that can prompt us to regularly engage in active self-exploration. In a little bit, we're going to do a self-exploration activity, but I want us to pay attention to the last bullet, understanding the links between our personal identities and recognizing how our thoughts, feelings, and action are interconnected with that identity. How does this connect to that video that we just watched? Feel free to share any of your reflections in that chat. So self-awareness is that foundational concept of social and emotional learning. I'm sure your schools might be talking a lot about SEL, but it begins with those questions that you ask yourself. What are the stories that you tell yourself? What stories do you tell yourself about others? How does it differ depending on your relationship with that person? Through questions like these, you can try to consciously unearth your own implicit bias, values, and beliefs. As most of us know from simple, everyday experience, that none of us are actually blind to race or color, and that when we raise our awareness of our emotions and sensations, we're more likely able to regulate our emotional responses, reduce anxiety, and increase empathy and perspective taking. All of these conditions can potentially support us in minimizing bias, assist us in co-regulating others, and make us better leaders. In light of your biases, consider how comfortable you are talking about race and racism. In order to be our best selves, we need to go inward to examine our own identities first, our own values, our own mindsets, our own actions. By regularly examining the ways in which identities, values, and mindsets influence our actions, we can be more effective and serve those around us. So thinking about finding those ghosts in your school, how can you do that? You got to know yourself first to make those connections. So we're going to move into an activity to go deeper into self-awareness and identity. In order to do this, it's critical that we have common language and understanding. So I'm going to take a few minutes to define some terms. Please feel free to share any alternative definitions that you might have or that you use in the chat. So the first term is race. Race is a social political construct, a system of separating people into groups based on skin color and physical characteristics. It's an invented concept that assigns social power, status, and worth, but it's a social reality. I like to think of race as color. Ethnicity is your internal, your values, your beliefs, your language, your traditions, your behaviors. I think of ethnicity as your culture. Then there's nationality. This is the external piece. It's your citizenship, it's your birthplace, it's what's on your passport. I think of this as the corner. What corner of the earth are you from? The next term is sex, which is biology, usually categorized as female or male. Then we have the concept of gender. This is your innermost concept of yourself as male, female, a blend of both, or neither. How individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves is their own gender identity, which can be the same or different from their assigned sex at birth. Sexual orientation. This is your sexual identity or self-identification as bisexual, heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual. I can't keep up with all the terms, but trying to put as many in there. And then socioeconomic status. This is the social standing or class of an individual or group. It's often measured as your education, your income, and your occupation. So those are terms that we're going to use in our activity, and I just want to make sure that we all kind of have common understanding of what those mean. I also want to connect and go a little bit deeper with what's culture. So I'm going to connect this to what PC mentioned about what is our why and how do we interact based on assumptions and stereotypes. Our experience and our identities shape our culture. I want to remind you that there are many aspects of culture, and oftentimes we spend way too much time at the surface level. So you see the things at the surface there: food, the way people dress, the music that they listen to, dance, celebrations, things like that. But in order to get to the deeper level, the things that are below the surface, we have to ask, we have to engage in conversations, and we have to believe that difference is okay. So we each carry our own culture with us at all times. Most people are unaware of the differing sets of communication assumptions or attributions and behaviors that have become normed in our society. For example, giving eye contact when being disciplined. What's considered courteous and appropriate in one culture can be discourteous and inappropriate in another culture, but we won't know unless we ask. If we approach cultures taking into consideration only the obvious outer layers, then there's a real risk of slipping into stereotypical labeling. Unless you know the underlying values, which are less visible, there's little chance of making sense of what's easily observable. So I want to think about norms and beliefs here for a minute. Norms are those unwritten rules. It's okay to do this. It's not okay to do that. Beliefs and assumptions support those norms. That's the because. It's okay to do this because. So for example, in my family, a norm is it's important to give to others, especially during the holidays. And the belief behind that is it's important to show gratitude for what you have. So you give to others. In the chat box, feel free to share some norms and beliefs in your family, your school, or your culture. Understanding that your own culture is important in leadership. Knowing how that shapes you and your experiences assists us in being a better leader. And also important to dig deeper, ask those questions of those around you. Find out, remember, conversations can be uncomfortable, but they lead to connection. So we're going to get into an activity. I'm going to post the link in case you actually want the Word document of this. But you can also just, if you have a moment, to grab a piece of paper next to you or a scrap message and draw this graphic on the screen, draw this circle. This activity is meant to be personal. It is self-reflective. You don't need to complete each prompt if it's making you feel uncomfortable. You don't need to share this with others. You can personally write this. You can rip it up afterwards. You can feel free to not share anything in the chat. This is a personal, self-reflective activity. So how you choose to engage with the activity is totally up to you. The goal of the activity is to encourage us to consider our own identities critically and how those identities are more or less keenly felt in different social contexts. To illuminate how privilege operates to normalize some identities over others, and to sensitize us to our shared identities and the diversity of identities in the space while encouraging empathy. So I'm going to pause here for a few minutes to let you complete your wheel. I'm going to add in the chat box where you can find this as a link, but also feel free to just draw it on a good old piece of paper. And complete each prompt using those definitions that we talked about before. Don't worry about the questions in the middle. We're going to debrief this together. But if you could kind of fill out the outer ring of the circle, and we're going to come back together for a conversation. So I'm going to pause for a moment, put this in the chat box, and we're going to get into some discussion. As I'm letting you guys complete this, I'm going to scroll through the chat and kind of see what you posted here. Thank you so much for your engagement. This virtual space is challenging for me. I'm so used to being in front of people, but it's amazing to be able to connect with you all in this virtual way. So Luke, I'm not sure if this is a question. What is physical ability? So thinking about, are you able-bodied? Do you have any limitations? Are there any things, you know, I hate using the word disability because I actually think that thinking back to that video clip, there's ways to change everything into a positive. But what are some of those things that impact your physical being? Your national origin is where you're from, what's on your passport. So typically that is United States of America, but might not be for everybody on this call. So I don't want to make an assumption. All right, since I can't see you, this is challenging for me because I'm not sure kind of where you are in this process. But I do want to get into a little bit of a discussion and a reflection around this activity. So when we are thinking about, hang on, I have something on my screen here. My computer is getting slow. All right, so as you're completing your wheel, we're going to do some reflections. Please feel free to respond to these in the chat. Personally write these if you're not wanting to publicly put them in the chat, that is completely fine. But I encourage you to make some reflections on these questions. I want to go over a few questions and prompts to get us to reflect and recognize our uniqueness of everybody. I loved when PC kept talking about how we are each unique. We are, and those uniquenesses are strengths. So I want us to think about that. So please feel free to share your responses in the chat if you are comfortable doing so. So the first one is, which identities do you think about most often? As you are filling out that wheel, writing those answers, were there pieces on that wheel that you think about most often? Or was it like, I never think about these things? And notice that that can be different for different people based on our own individual unique experiences. So thinking about, what do you think about most often? And if we were all together having a conversation with others about what do they think about most often and why? How does that shift and change? With the most often, which identities do you think about least often? Why is that? Why don't you think about them? Sometimes I equate this, I don't think about it because it's actually a privilege. So I don't have to think about it because it's just become part of normed life, and that identity is very welcomed in wherever I'm at. So what identities do you think about least often? Age, language. I think about age a lot. I'm getting old. Thank you, Alyssa, for being vulnerable and acknowledging that sometimes you don't think about race because it's actually a privilege and we don't have to think about our skin color. That's a vulnerable contribution. Thank you. Awesome. So I'm sure there's connections you're all making with each other, being a youth in today's society, but there's also unique experiences. The next question is, reflect to yourself why this might be. What influences that? So I've already kind of prompted this question, but think critically about, why do I think about that a lot? Why don't I think about that other aspect a lot? Do my actions. So I love when PC was mentioning and asked you all to think critically about what are your values and how do you spend your time? Do those things match up? So if I think about this a lot, if I think it's really important to me, thinking about an iceberg of culture, if this is a really important value to my life, are you spending your time doing that? And the last question is, which identities have the greatest effect on how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you? Actually, I think there's one more question, but which identities have the greatest effect on how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you? So I think PC gave a great example of this when he was talking about walking around his college campus. When he was walking around with his jeans on and his belt, people perceived him in a certain way. And then when he put his baseball jacket on, folks perceived him in a different way. So which aspects of your identity impact how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you? And being aware of that. And then the tricky question here, so I'm going to move my chat box so I can read it. How do your answers change based on the context of where you're at? So if you're with your families and your friends, if you're with folks that you're comfortable with, if you're at school, if you're in a new place, if you're in your community, how do your answers change based on that? So I think, you know, I was put into a unique experience. I mentioned to you all, I'm a white woman. I'm married to a Black man. I grew up in a pretty white suburban town. Yes, I had a few friends of different races or different ethnicities, but generally I spent a lot of time in white space. And I will never forget my first Thanksgiving meal at my husband's, he was then my boyfriend's, family. And I think of this experience because I want to explain to you kind of the shift in context. In my household, green bean casserole is a highlight of our Thanksgiving meal. So when my husband's sister-in-law asked, can you bring something over to join our Thanksgiving meal? I made a green bean casserole. And I show up at their home. I was the only white person in this space. And there's all these things across the Thanksgiving dinner table that I had never had before. Collard greens, they call it dressing versus what I call stuffing. But at the end of the meal, I go up to the buffet of food and I was the only person who took the spoonful of green bean casserole. So I think of that experience, I left there being like, oh my gosh, I don't fit in. But unfortunately, that was my first experience. And what I realized is what's important in my culture and in my community around a dish for Thanksgiving differs, and that's okay that it's different. And I fit in just fine. I had to find the other ways that I connected with folks. But in that context, I felt different. Which was not something that I was used to, which was not something that was part of my normal experience. So thinking critically about how these change based on who you're with and who you're around. And where are you more comfortable in your identity? So what I want to do is, I'm not sure if there's any questions or answer kind of posts in the chat, but I want to leave a few moments to kind of let you guys all engage. So if there is a question or a comment that you'd like to make, please feel free to put it in the chat, but also feel free to add it in the questions box so we can kind of see how I can support you all. Because that activity is, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I'm having a hard time with controls. There we go. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions yet, but if any of you would like to kind of post any questions in there, I'm going to wrap up with a few things. One is I do a lot of training with school districts around equity, social justice, and folks quickly want to go to what do we do about this? How can we fix this? And I was intentional today by starting with self. So thinking critically about who we are, how do we show up to conversations? How do we know who we are? So this is important to us. What's our value set behind this? So thinking critically that we take this step, this really needed first step, to first self-reflect, to hold up the mirror. Nobody's perfect, and acknowledge those pieces. So I see a question came in. How do you start an engaging, uncomfortable conversation? That's a hard question to answer. But I think we probably have all been around them, and we either choose not to say something and walk away, or to go talk to somebody else about it. So I'm going to give a personal example here. I told you all I'd be vulnerable and honest. So I think about when I was pregnant for my son, my mom said to me, oh gosh, I hope he is not born with that auburn afro that his dad had. And I could have easily let that comment slip, let her make that comment, whereas I could see my husband sitting there and his face just drop by that comment, that he was hurt by that comment. So I had to be brave in that moment and acknowledge that discomfort of my husband and take the time to make this a teachable moment for my mom about how that comment she made about what my son's hair may or may not look like impacts those around us. And I think sometimes thinking critically about intent and impact. I will tell you, my mom started crying. She felt really bad. She didn't intend to hurt anybody's feelings in that, but thinking critically to spend our time focusing on the impact. How did that impact my husband? How did that impact me as a mom? And unpack the impact more than we talk about the intent behind it. How do I approach a white person who refuses to accept the reality of social inequality and systemic racism? So I think it's really important, and I think PC did a great job of illustrating this, that we can't sit on this side versus that side. I think it's important to know where you are, but you're never going to change somebody by forcing things at them. And oftentimes I think personally about this, I have a family member that I had to have some courageous conversations with, but then I realized I was not changing her mind, and I had to set some of my own boundaries up. What made me uncomfortable? What was I willing to engage in? What was I not willing to engage in? Because our value and belief system were not on the same page. But I encourage folks to always start with facts, know what you're talking about, and have the reality to be able to present. So to start with some awareness stuff. Implicit bias that people experience in school. So that's how do we combat that? I think that's a challenging piece, and I'm not sure I'm exactly understanding the question, but I think there's a couple pieces to implicit bias that I want to talk about. One is, first, we all have it. It's a normal thing, but what is important about implicit bias is once you recognize it, you got to change your behavior. So if I know, for example, I'm going to give an example that I've used before in training. I used to live in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'd say, oh gosh, at night, when I go out to my car, if there was a gentleman walking towards me, I'd quickly switch sides of the road, put my keys in between my fingers, and be ready, to keep myself safe. That's a bias I had. And then I needed to stop and recognize that. So instead of seeing somebody coming and making judgments and assumptions about that person, I need to think about what's underneath that behavior and to change my behavior. I also encourage you all to use your voice. So if there are things happening in your school buildings, if there are behaviors, actions, comments being made that are making you uncomfortable, to please reach out to your allies around you, to your trusted adults, and have those difficult conversations. So I'm going to take 2 more questions. I'm going to make sure we leave time for the other great speakers. How do we help others understand that any of these identities, the question specifically was around economic status, shouldn't label a person? So I think PC mentioned this. Unfortunately, we are so full of messages from external sources. The media tell us what's important. Social media tells us what's important. The news, tells us all about those things. We have to start changing that narrative, and it takes time to change that narrative. But I think it's important to highlight all of the other strengths that you have, all of the other aspects of your identity that make you who you are. Not one piece identifies you in itself. They all work to create who you are. So I think that's important to think about. Oh, that's a great hard question, the last one. And I'm going to end on this question. Do you teach about racism? Since you have not experienced it, do you think you can teach others? So I mentioned in my intro, I'm not an expert, but I think I can encourage conversations and have conversations about race and culture, even though I am a white woman. And I do experience race. I don't experience racism in my life. Well, I do actually now as a mom of children of color. There's experiences that I've personally experienced as a mom, but I do experience race. I've experienced how whiteness has shaped my experiences. So as I cannot personally speak to systemic racism, I do think that I have a job and that I have a role as a white woman to support this work, but also, and I'm going to be really intentional here, honoring and respecting the people of color who are doing this work first, and that their perspective and that their work matters, and that I do have a voice and a role in these conversations, I believe. So with that, I'm going to share real quickly my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. It feels so weird to say that I'm from the State Department of Ed. I don't want that to be a barrier to anybody because I'm a real human being first. So my job at the State Department of Ed is really around school climate, bullying prevention, restorative practices, inclusion, all of those pieces. So if you have any questions, concerns, ways that you'd like to reach out, please feel free to send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you again so much for allowing me to be part of this conference. Keep up the great work. Being a leader and a youth in today's society is challenging, but I know you guys can do it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda Pickett. I'm going to introduce Kendrick Moore now. Kendrick Moore is the School and Community Resource Coordinator at Windsor High School. He's also the founder of a youth organization, Moore Basketball Clinic. At Windsor High School, he has created multiple programs which focus on leadership development. His community-based organization, Moore Basketball Clinic, also caters to the growth of young people along with the overall development of our communities. For his commitment and work in the community, he has received numerous honors, which include 100 Men of Color nominee, Bridge Builder Award, PSBL Community Service Award, and the JCC Schoolboy Class Distinguished Alumni Award, just to name a few. He is dedicated to the youth and he is motivated by the youth. I am excited to welcome Kendrick Moore.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I really appreciate it. And I want to say hello to all of the young people here. It's exciting. It's unbelievable. Another experience to get on here and change some lives and have a real impact on what you guys do every day. Wonderful job by the two speakers that spoke before me. Very hard to follow because I'm one that I don't really write down and script a lot of things when I have the opportunity to speak, and to see that they covered a lot of things. So now I, kind of got to go off the cuff, but I do have the umbrella topic, which is to become a better me. And my topic is really about you and you putting in the work to change how you think and how it's going to impact your life. So, and there are multiple layers under each of these topics, but I'm gonna try to limit them based for time's sake. So if you can just bear with me, but please make sure you're engaged in the conversation and understand that I'm here for you. And I want you to make sure you understand the value in everything that we're gonna have delivered for you today. So becoming a better me, the first thing I want you guys to understand, and I want to challenge you guys to even try to implement this stuff over the next couple of weeks, is really to remodel yourself, right? I want you guys to focus on becoming a better version of yourself each and every day. I do that myself. Like I constantly think of ways to become better. One of the things I started doing recently was really in the morning. Every morning I get up, I start listening to positive affirmations, right? Just like you, I'm insecure in a lot of areas. I have to remind myself that I need to be confident today. I have to remind myself the power that I have each and every day. I have to remind myself to be a giver and to go out and change lives and understand the value of that. I have to continuously remind myself that each and every day I'm going to have a good day. So I want you to try to implement that every day because I'm really big on approach. Right? I'm really big on preparation. So how you start your day can have a positive impact on you each and every day. So I really want you to take time, 5-10 minutes each morning before you get going, whether it's before you get out of bed, right after you brush your teeth, to really deliver yourself some positive affirmations on how your day is going to look. Trust me, it'll work wonders. So I really want you to focus on, and I'm challenging you guys to do that. Another thing as it pertains to becoming a better person, and this is going to be tough for a lot of people because sometimes we don't even understand what to sacrifice, right? So the second one is to make the necessary sacrifices in your life. I need you to understand that. So we have meaningless versus meaningful things that impact our lives. Meaningless versus meaningful things that really impact our lives, right? There are a lot of meaningless things that we spend too much time focusing on throughout the course of a day, right? Things that don't give us the return on investment that we would like, right? But what do those things really look like? Because here's the deal. We all look for approval. Right? We all look for approval from others. We all look for satisfaction. We all look for the gratification of things and rewards, etc. The thing is, most of us spend our time looking and searching for meaningless things that provide those things to us. One of those things is social media. You know, our insecurities are one of the things that really drives us to social media, right? Because here's the deal. We look for the immediate gratification. Like there's no way in the world or nowhere in the world where you can duplicate the rate of satisfaction, approval, gratification that you're going to get from social media. That's one of the main reasons why people are, and young people, older people alike, are so focused and attentive to it, because it provides us this immediate sense of approval, right? If you walk down your school hallway with a new shirt on every day, you might get one or two people that might acknowledge that you had a new shirt on. If you post that picture on social media and let people know that you got a new shirt on, you'll probably get 700 likes from people that you have no clue no clue about. So we seek that approval, right? And so there's no really real way of duplicating that. So our insecurities drive us to certain things, right? And so if we can just really understand that when we need what we need to sacrifice, which gives no return on investment, is that meaningless, right? Meaningless. I stress it a lot, and I talk to our kids a lot because I know how much it impacts us. But man, that meaningless sense of approval, it has probably done more damage to the young people in terms of how to value their time than anything, right? So making the necessary sacrifices throughout the course of your day, right? Another big thing that I want you guys to focus on, and I'm challenging you to understand and what to look at, is to become an unselfish thinker. Right? It's a very hard thing to do because most of the time we want to put ourselves first, right? Which is understandable, right? But here's the deal. I want you guys to think about being a part of the greater good. As we approach the Student Equity Advisory Board and the social justice issues and what we want you guys to implement and bring back to your school, that's one of the things we need to make sure we're concentrating on, because if we cannot accomplish that thought process right there, if we cannot accomplish that, which is unselfish thinking, there's no way that we're going to allow ourselves to think outside of the box, especially if we're not the ones being affected by certain situations, right? Unselfish thinking is a powerful tool, right? When you are able to give or provide to someone in need, there are two winners involved. There's yourself with the gratification of giving, and there's also the people who you were able to assist in that moment of need. Unselfish thinking is a positive tool. Like I said, I can go on about that all day, but really try to implement that into your way of being, like how you approach things, being an unselfish thinker. And finally, the topic, and I was thinking about different ways of bringing it up. I didn't want it to come across the wrong way because I'm a very emotional person, and some very close people to me have passed away recently. I was at a funeral a couple weeks ago, and my brother was leading the service, right? And one of the conversations he was having with us, and one of the messages he delivered, was how the person who passed lived such a fruitful life, a rewarding life, right? So I want to challenge you guys to make sure that you guys every day, this is a daily thing, to make sure you empty the tank. This has nothing to do with you being tired at the end of the day. This has nothing to do with what time you go to bed every day. You can go to bed at 8. You can go to bed at 1 and be in the same situation. This has something to do with making sure when you look back on your day, you fulfilled every goal that you set out to go after, that you gave and made the world a better place, that you reach way beyond your limits that those people put on you. Like, I want you to make sure you empty the tank every single day. Don't leave any stone uncovered, unturned, right? So whether it has to do with your school, your academics, how you approach it, when you get to every class on time, you're raising your hand, you're performing at a high level. You know, you're showing your face when the teachers ask you to on the Zoom meetings and not being defiant, right? When your parents ask you to do something, you go above and beyond. You get to the point where you actually start functioning at a level where you can go do things before your parents even ask you to do it, right? When people are challenging you, you accept the challenges. And when things get tough, you go even harder, right? I want to make sure that you empty the tank every single day. So when you look back on that day, you feel like everything that you tried to accomplish has been accomplished. It doesn't mean you got it right, but you went at it with everything you had. So I want to make sure you guys understand that, because going back to what I was speaking about just a couple minutes ago, here's the deal. If you guys got a chance to read your own obituary tomorrow, what would it say? If you guys got a chance to be in that position, right, to where you can live a fruitful life and try to accomplish everything, go after everything, you know, build the confidence that you need based on certain things, put things in certain places where it's going to just benefit you, removing certain people from your life, creating those situations where you're positive affirmations, where you're just talking good things into your life every day. What does that look like versus the way many of us are living every day? What does that look like versus the way many of us are living every day? Because most of us, and not even myself every day, right, are emptying the tank every day. Before I go to bed, sometimes I think like, man, I left a lot of things on the table. And that feeling sucks. It's one of the worst feelings in the world when I end my day and know I didn't give everything I got to certain things. Again, I'm a very shy and quiet person. You know, with talking to some of our young people here, even our leadership programs, they get to see both sides of me, right? They get to see the me when they looking at them to myself and quiet, but they also get that leadership me is when it's time for me to deliver a message to them. I'm this person that you see right now. But I know at the end of my day, when I look back, if I don't go after everything in that fierce and intense way, man, I feel like it's like dry, like I still got gas in the tank. Like I didn't fulfill my destiny. I didn't do what I'm put here for, which is to change people's lives, right? So I'm challenging you to make sure at the end of each day, every day, like I want you to assess it seriously. As I want you to assess it and look back and say, man, I got to make sure I gave everything. And then if you don't, the next day, do not let it happen, duplicate it. Right? Do not let it be duplicated. Do not let it happen twice in a row. That next day, if you understand, because what it is at the end of the day, you'll understand how that looks. You'll understand that feeling, right? And I need you to get to that point where each and every day, like I said, it has nothing to do with the time you go to bed. You can go to bed at 8 o'clock and feel like, man, I accomplished everything. I went at everything. I accomplished my goals. I did extra, etc. You can go to bed at 1 a.m. and feel like, man, like, you know what? I ain't accomplished nothing. I was on social media all day. I wasted time with my friends, X, Y, and Z that provided no return on investment. Right? So if we can just remember these things as we move forward, that's the challenge for you, right? Becoming a better me, including those positive affirmations each day, making the necessary sacrifices that's needed to fulfill your lives. Practice unselfish thinking. I really want you to focus on that. Practice unselfish thinking. And then make sure at the end of each day, you sit down and reevaluate the things that took place and make sure you empty the tank. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I want you to shoot them to me. We'll try to get through them as soon as possible. Like I said, I wanted to get through that quick because I know we have another speaker coming on after me, which is going to be brilliant. But I'm passionate about this. And here's the deal, what I told them in the last conference. I'm not showing up here not to be in your corner from here on out. Every time I meet a young person, I'm with you for the rest of the ride. So at any time, if you need anything from me, feel free to contact me at any time. So if you have any questions, we'll take them right now.
Yeah, so you guys can just type in the Q&A box and I'll read it to you, Kendrick, if you guys have any questions. Okay, so we have a couple questions. This is from Maria. She said, do you have any socials we can follow you on?
Yes, I do. And what I'll do is I'll type them in the chat.
Okay. So we have another question. Someone said, how do you differ from unselfish thinking and selfish thinking?
That's a really great question, because it's a tough one, because our minds all, just naturally think about ourselves and how to be better each day. But that's not the area of concern as I focus on selfish thinking. Yes, you want to make sure you're taking care of yourself every day and getting the best out of each day. But as I'm talking about unselfish thinking, it's about the greater good and being able to put yourself in a position to do more for others, right? The value that adds to not only your life, but to other people's lives. I sit and I talk about different things with our kids as we talk about decision making, et cetera, how we think, how we approach things, and how that adds value, right? And so I definitely appreciate the question. It is one of those things, honestly, that we can go on for a long time with trying to explain that.
Okay, so I'm gonna combine these questions. So they're asking, how do you balance self-care with emptying your tank, or what are the best ways?
Right. Yep. So here's the deal. Self-care, understand, throughout the course of the day, we're still taking care of ourselves. This is the beauty of it. I'm glad you asked that question, because I deal with young people in different areas of life, right? I'm big with basketball. I coach, I train, etc. One of the young ladies that I had a pleasure of coaching 3 years ago, she attends East Carolina University. And so she's a great talent, unbelievable talent, great scorer. She's from Hamden, Connecticut. And I sent her a message the other day just to check in, because the first game she didn't really play well. So I sent her, hey, how you doing, et cetera, Now this is a hardworking lady as well, hardworking young lady. She says to me, and this is why when Fiona sent that message, delivered that bio at the beginning, I said, you guys motivate me. She said to me, I count my blessings every day. So there's no need for me to sit here and complain. I make sure I'm in a good headspace. Now, I know her family very well. They taught this young lady the value of understanding the blessings that she has every day. And through the course of this process, she takes care of herself every day, right? But at the end of each day, she's going to be able to look back and say, I gave everything I got. And that's the reason why she's able to say, I'm not going to sit here and complain, because I gave every little thing I got during the day. All right. So that's an excellent question, because I think sometimes we get into that thing of really understand, like, oh man, I'm exhausted, I wore myself out, etc. But really, we haven't put enough value into the things that are important to us.
So last question, I'm gonna combine these two. So they just want to know, like, how do you stay motivated? So how do you keep going to get things done?
So so is this for them?
Yeah, it's for them. They, how do they stay motivated? How do they keep going?
Purpose, right? Purpose. And one of the things as I'm big on, again, approach, how we look at things, how we attack things from the beginning of our days. You're looking at someone, it's funny, my brother said, talk to them about where you're from. My brother's big into leadership as well. I didn't take that approach today, but he's like, talk to them about where you're from. And his understanding behind it was really to let you guys know that you could be from any background and accomplish a high level of things. Like, how do I stay motivated? I'm gonna tell you that you find little things that you find value in that's gonna give you that drive and make sure you understand your purpose. Before I got on this call today, right? Before Ms. Pickett got off, before she got off, this is what I did. This is what motivated me to make sure I get on there and deliver. I called my mother. I said, "Ma, how you doing?" They said, "Oh, okay, I just got home," etc. Okay, fine, bye, let's get busy. Because that's what drives me every day. So you got to find something that's going to bring you purpose to keep you motivated. It's not going to be easy, right? But I got to make sure that I'm in a great headspace every day to make sure I deliver. I can't fill my mind with junk and expect to come and deliver to you. I can't pick up the phone and say, "Oh man, let me scramble through social media and just look at garbage all day and expect to be here when 400 kids are expecting me to be at my best." I can't do that. Right? So I got to make sure I understand how to sacrifice that stuff. I got to wake up with the positive affirmations. I got to make sure I'm ready and in the right headspace to come and deliver.
Well, thank you for everything. Very inspiring. And now we're introducing Ryan Martin. Okay. Ryan is the executive director of the international nonprofit organization, the Ryan Martin Foundation. RMF's mission is to help the youth and adult athletes with disabilities live independent, impassioned, productive, and full lives through sports training, mentoring, and education. Ryan is also the advisor for the City University of New York Athletic Conference, working to bring an adaptive sports program to their New York City campuses. He currently plays for the NWBA back-to-back reigning national champions, the New York Rolling Knicks. Previously, Ryan played professional basketball in Spain and France for 10 seasons. He was the most recently named as the vice president of the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. This video coming up shares more about Ryan Martin's story.
It continues to be free of charge. I've had tremendous support since day one.
I think what everybody likes about Ryan is the quick friendship.
Kelly, how are you? Good morning.
Getting by. I think what people are most impressed with Ryan is just his sheer will and determination to do whatever he wants to do. He gets an idea in his head and he's just going to go do it.
And what we might have to do, I'm going to strip this out real quick.
How do you exactly have it wrong?
Okay, so here's the deal. You see how this is adjustable? What it probably is, it's probably too loose. So what the foundation has grown. So, you know, we're doing camps in Europe and several throughout the U.S. It'll stay.
It don't make any sense to go through something in life. Maybe that causes pain, but you don't get a reward from it. And I think he's really getting reward from it, from his mentorship program, through his educational program, through his foundation, to his various camps that he's doing. He's a great man.
Okay, good job. We're gonna work on this all week, okay? Good start. I've had great people that have really opened doors for me, and I feel like that pay it forward motto, if I can do that for one kid, and I hope I'm doing it more because we're spending a lot of weeks around the country, that's what I want to do. Boom, good shot. All right, good job.
I think that once you become a friend with Ryan, you're hooked, and so you might get a random text at 3 in the morning when he's overseas, and he's asking you a specific question about something because he knows that you might be the right person to talk to, and he uses his network as good as anybody that I've ever met.
We'll have you go through another time, okay? Good job, man. Ball. Hey, Angel, ready? Otra vez. As soon as I was able to start making shots and playing basketball, it was like, like that moment, like that surreal moment, like, wow, I found something I really love and that I want to do.
So that is Ryan Martin. So now we'll have a Q&A with Ryan Martin and John Holt. John Ho is our media and production director for the CAS-CIAC. So if you guys have any questions to Ryan Martin, you guys can leave it in the Q&A.
All right, Justin, thank you very much. It's nice to have you and Fiona and Jada doing our moderating today, and we appreciate you doing that. It is our pleasure to have Ryan Martin with us. Ryan has been a friend of mine for years. We're certainly lucky to have someone who is a professional athlete, a fellow standout basketball player just like Kendrick Moore, who preceded him. Ryan, we saw the video to get a little feel for your story. You mentioned about paying it forward to those that sort of gave you an opportunity. Tell us more about your background and your story, your sports journey.
Yeah, so first of all, John, thanks for joining me on this and doing this format a little bit differently. And thanks to the CIAC for having me on and being able to kind of pay it forward to all these students during this difficult time. And I got to catch the tail end of Coach Moore's talk. And so I'll try to be as inspired. I was ready to jump through a wall after listening to Coach Moore speak. So this is great. Yeah, so I was born with spina bifida. And so, my traditional route to playing sports was a little bit different, and I'm a little bit older. So there wasn't as many opportunities for individuals with disabilities in the space of sports, subsequently now the adaptive sports movement and the inclusive sports model with unified sports and adaptive sports has really increased throughout the state and throughout nationally. But, I was often, excluded from different opportunities because I was the only person with a disability. And so for me, when I finally did find sports in my teenage years, it kind of gave me a sense of purpose and a sense of self, and, I think a lot of our students on this call can relate to being different, whether that's based on their ability level, the color of their skin, or other circumstances. And so basketball for me gave me that place where I fit in. And I was, Ryan, the kid who, even though was in a wheelchair, could shoot a basket really well. And that became the narrative versus Ryan, the guy with no legs, or Ryan, the person who was, we started to be able to focus on my abilities versus my disability.
We should mention you are a Connecticut native. You're a Summers High School graduate, went on to play on scholarship of wheelchair basketball in college. But getting back to your roots in Summers, and you alluded to some of it, but what was your access to sports as a child, and what did sports do for you as a young person with a disability?
As a youth with a disability, you're oftentimes excluded, and you're kind of ostracized from that normal community, and sports at a youth level really gives you a sense of identity, right? You learn some fundamental skills such as, teamwork, leadership, and, all those different things like that. So for me to not find basketball early on was really kind of a struggle. It probably prevented me from reaching my potential in other areas. And so finding it just opened a lot of doors for me. So instead of being the person, in a gym class that was doing something by themselves, off in the corner of the gym, and now we have adaptive PE and we're a little more inclusive, I was kind of doing my own thing until, I picked up a basketball, and that allowed me to, stand out for all the right reasons.
When did you know that basketball could become more than sort of just a hobby for you, that it could become something you develop a career around? You could launch a foundation which hosts camps domestically, including here in Connecticut, and internationally, wheelchair basketball camps that are all free of charge for the attendees. In other words, when did you start to realize you could be a leader in this space?
That's a great question. And I don't know if there was ever an aha moment. For me, I fell in love with the game, and I fell in love with the process of being great, right? And the sweat equity of that. And, when I went to college, I was just really happy to get a scholarship because I come from a family of 12 where my parents adopted kids with special needs. So, for me to get a free college education, I was like, oh man, I'm well above it, and then when I signed my first contract, I was like, hey, I'm going to live in Madrid for a year. Hopefully I learned some Spanish and, I'll go back and, go to the US, but it didn't, little by little, I grew to understand that, even if I scored 30 points in the Madrid versus Barcelona game, which is, the huge rivalry, in Spanish sports, that didn't make anything better, right? There was still going to be, copious amounts of youth with disabilities, nationally and internationally that didn't have the same opportunities, right? So my passion became to use my vehicle to create opportunities for others and create the option for them to carve out their own dreams. And I think oftentimes, for our youth with disabilities, we set expectations and we set limits, and I think the best advice I can give to an individual with a disability, or even just, anybody, is to define your own circumstances and define your own limits. If you would have told, 20-year-old Ryan that you're going to have, an international nonprofit and you're going to spend your morning developing programming in Russia, for, youth athletes with disabilities, and then jump on a call and talk to, 40 or, 400 high school seniors in the state of Connecticut, I probably would have laughed at you. But, that's what I've been able to do. And, when I look back at my greatest memories as an athlete, I think those are always secondary to the fact that, last year, our junior program sent 3 kids to college that most likely wouldn't have gone to college, and the fact that our program in Spain has now, grown from supporting 20 athletes with disabilities in Spain to 100, right? Those are the type of growth things that really inspire me and really motivate me still to this day.
I wanted to mention that one of the things that I've admired watching you for a decade or so is that not only are you introducing young people to basketball, but you're giving them those life skills and that confidence to realize I too can attend college. What am I going to do vocationally? What job can I project myself in as a person with a disability? And those are so important. We want to take a look at some photos of you just so people get the sense of this is you in competition in international games at times through the years. Also some photos from your camps. And can you define for me, it's possible for someone to see someone with a disability and find them inspiring. But I know that's sort of a third rail word for you. What's the difference between you wanting to inspire others by what you do as an adaptive sports athlete versus really truly being a leader or setting examples or going deeper than just some surface inspiration?
Yeah, I think with our consumption of social media, we're all about Motivation Monday, and we're all about, finding, sources of motivation and sources of inspiration. And I think oftentimes we look at individuals with disabilities almost as, our de facto go-to things. And that's great. Like if if my story inspires you or motivates you to do something more. But I also think that, of all the things I bring to the table, my disability is a small portion of who I am. And if you ask me to describe myself using 5 adjectives, I could define myself in many ways beyond just the disability piece, right? So I would encourage people to understand that, yes, while disability is a factor, and disability is probably around you more than you realize, if we're thinking about invisible disabilities versus visible disabilities, there's more to it, right? And so to me, I like with our programming that we do, we want to develop leaders. If you historically look at the data, individual with disabilities don't, have a higher level of unemployment, and they're, and they have a lower expectancy of quality of life. So promoting the idea of education for individuals with disabilities changes those factors, right? So I'll often go to donors when I'm doing my fundraising and putting on my development hat and say, listen, I don't care if our kids ever make a basket, because there's a larger picture to it, right? And being a person with a disability who has a college education and has skills, I think that's the bigger thing, right? So we aspire to make exceptional athletes, but we want to create leaders, and we want to create folks that are able to, navigate their skills and be able to be a positive statistic and live a better quality of life, right? So we look at adaptive sports as being a vehicle for greater success.
I want to encourage our students that are tuned in with us to put some questions in the Q&A. And I know we have a question, initial question we're going to get to. When Amanda was speaking earlier, she was talking how we feel about how others perceive us. What was the perception like for you before you gained the status you have now? And you alluded to some of this as a young person, but even as a young adult, when you were first trying to make your name, and that's our first question from Tonali, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, hopefully. How did you feel when people changed the way they started to look at you all of a sudden? Because did you feel there was a change, and why do you think that was? And was it unfair? All of a sudden, did you gain certain respect and you were wondering, or maybe that was for years, or are people looking at me differently now because I'm in a position of leadership?
Yeah, they do. I think how I'm judged when I go into a new situation is often based on how people perceive a person with a disability, right? You know, I could come into a room and I wheel in my wheelchair, and there's already things that are working against me in the room, right? You know, if I go into, you know, a business meeting, you know, I often get looked at like, well, is he got this position because he's a person with a disability and he created his own foundation, or does he, you know, does he have the chops to be in the room, so to speak? And I can't control what people think of me before they meet me, right? You know, that's just is what it is. And I hope that we've created a, you know, a more inclusive society where we can look past people with disabilities. But my goal every time I come into a new situation is to get you to see me and not see the wheelchair, right? And not see, you know, and judge me on the merit. And my thought process is how I handle it, how I handle a situation, and that engagement with you is going to impact how you respond to the next person with a disability, whether you know they're a person with a disability or not, right? So that is, you know, something that like I accept as, you know, kind of my role, you know, in the community, and to promote inclusivity. But I often say, you know, if you can watch me play basketball and see me hit 3-pointers, right? And I can change your mind on adaptive sports, I can change your mind on just inclusion in general, you know, whether it's in an educational setting, whether it's an employment setting, and different things like this. And to me, I am a rigid believer in inclusion. You know, I believe in, you know, kind of the concepts that Brown v. Board, that separate is not equal, right? I believe that every opportunity that is available to the mainstream public should be available to individuals with disabilities. And part of our growth strategy from an organizational level, you know, is to look at opportunities that maybe historically people with disabilities aren't given, and trying to create those opportunities. You know, and that's always been my guiding focus, just to, you know, really embrace that model of inclusion and find a way to make that work.
We do have some questions coming in. We'll get to those and keep them coming from the students in the Q&A. In the promotional video that we produced for this conference, and that started out our day today at the very beginning before Sharice welcomed everybody, you mentioned that leadership to you, part of your leadership definition, leadership is strictly not about your position. You don't have to have that title. It's about your actions. So someone at a local level or hasn't earned that title yet can still be a leader.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the fundamental pillars of leadership is inspiring others to lead, right? No one can go it alone, right? So you need to create, to be a true leader, you need to empower others to do the same, right? And so that is kind of one of my foundational pillars of leadership, you know, and my leadership style has been kind of forged from having to work in different cultures and different languages. You know, I was playing in Madrid, where we had, you know, athletes from, you know, 7 different countries on our team. And I was tasked with trying to lead that group, right? And you don't do that alone, right? There is, you know, creating and empower leadership. And, you know, I think we throw around, you know, all these different, you know, things about leadership. A good leader does X, a good leader does Y. But the first thing a leader needs to do is to empower others, right? You need to get people to be behind you, or you can't drive change and you can't drive progress. So I think that's kind of, you know, my fundamental pillar even within my organization, right? You know, I built a, you know, a grassroots nonprofit that now works in multiple countries, right? And I get a lot of credit and, you know, a lot of blame when things don't go well. But, you know, the first thing I did when I built my nonprofit board into structure was put people in place who were smarter than me, right? You know, I don't know everything. I know what I know. But, you know, part of leadership is being comfortable to be put in a room where you might not have all the answers, but you're creating a better product, right? Because you're creating that environment. So I think, I think leadership is hard work. I think leadership looks different for each individual person. But for me, like, kind of as I mentioned, the pillar of leadership, in my opinion, is empowering others, right? And not knowing all the answers. I think a lot of times, people in leadership are like, oh my God, we need to do this, we need to do that, and especially in light of what's going on, but no one goes it alone. And, you're only as strong as those who follow you and those who support you. And so I think that's, kind of been my guiding force with whatever project that I get involved with, or, managing different organizational responsibilities.
Ryan, has it been gratifying at this point, because you've been doing it for a number of years, to see young people that have gone to your camps, that have made a connection with you and the Ryan Martin Foundation, start to become leaders? Are you seeing some alums from your camps do some things you're very proud of? And could you share that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I still, I'll make this joke, and John, I think you and I have probably had this conversation. I get a lot of young people who reach out and they say, hey, I want to start a nonprofit. And my first answer is don't, right? Because it's, whatever you thought it was, it's probably not going to be that. But, still the best part of my day is when we're able to introduce a person to adaptive sports who has never done it before. And then it's awesome to, get a text message from some of our students who are like, hey, I'm going to go to grad school, or, hey, that interview that I've got the position, and I start to see them change the future of what their life trajectory is going to be, and different things like that. That's still the purpose. That's still my why, regardless of whether that's, domestically, whether that's internationally. And so at the end of the day, when you need to find your purpose, and I know that was one of the things we wanted to talk about today, you have to find what kind of just sets your soul on fire, right? And for me, that's never been money. That's never been anything but creating other opportunities for people that otherwise they don't have. And I throw myself into a lot of different challenges because I'm constantly seeking that, right? That's what motivates me, is to be able to see what what we've created as an organization, and then to watch it blossom, right? Because when we started this, I had no idea it was going to become this. You asked me at the beginning, John, when did I think basketball would be something more? Never did, right? I just kept on working, trusting that the game was going to do right by me if I did right by it, right? And the same thing with my foundation. I never would have envisioned, doing different programming in different camps and creating different things for students with disabilities. It was just a matter of, I just kept moving, kept going, and so I think that's still why I get up every morning, to, just to see what new is going to be, earlier today, I was discussing, being a part of making a video game for wheelchair basketball, like a version of 2K, and to me, I was like, wow, this is a really interesting project, but this is a really cool project for youth with disabilities to see representation in all forms, right? So that, that's really, I'm really kind of jacked up about that, actually. And so that's kind of how I work, the next challenge, and, staying true to what, my core values are.
I know you told me at 1 o'clock you have a call coming up with the Boston Celtics. The Ryan Martin Foundation has a relationship among many other groups with the Celtics. So as you can see out in the audience, Ryan is doing a lot of cool things. At the same time, though, I know there have been challenges. How have you dealt with failure as a leader? Because when you decide to be a leader, there are going to be some disappointments. This leads into one of our questions from the students, and we have about 5 more minutes if you want to get in a question in the Q&A. The student wonders, how do you deal with a situation where people doubt you, or by extension where you failed? You can't sell them on maybe the value of an adaptive program at their school or for their students. Has that been a challenge at times to get your message out to everybody?
Oh yeah, more often than not. Fortunately for these type of platforms, you get to focus on the benefit of things, right? But I made my living on playing a sport where 50% of the time, if I did something well, I was considered pretty darn good, right? So the nature of sports, you know, allows you the opportunity to be humbled by losing, and it allows you to refocus. I mean, like one of the projects that I really embraced myself on was getting an adaptive sports program at the University of Connecticut, right? So that didn't go the way that I wanted, but I used that for motivation, and I took a job with the University of Michigan. And, you know, I took the position I'm at right now with the City University of New York, right? So it's all about failure is easy to deal with if you've put in the work, right? Because, you know, Coach Moore was talking about emptying your tank every day and different things like that. I can rest assured that, you know, I'm going to win some and I'm going to lose some, but it's not going to be on the merit that I didn't do what I was supposed to do, right? And so that just constantly motivates me. You know, in basketball, we talk about shooter's amnesia, right? And I'm sure Coach Moore talks about this with his athletes, right? You miss the shot, but you got to forget about it because that next shot's going to be right around the corner, and you don't want the first shot to turn into the second shot, and then you're in this proverbial essence of quicksand for my like sports psychology type of people. So for me, it's always, you know, evaluate the situation, take from it what you can, but then move on. Like you need to embrace failure just like you embrace success. And otherwise, you're not going to reach your zenith of potential, in my opinion. I think, you know, you have to be able to analyze, evaluate, and move on. And that has to be your motivation. And I think intrinsically, athletes at high level, you know, high collegiate level athletes or professional athletes, we hate losing more than we like winning, right? So that's going to be something that either motivates you or just tears you down, and that's your choice.
In the final few minutes we have with Ryan, let's take some of the questions in the Q&A. And this, of course, is very timely, certainly something we have given a lot of thought to here at the CAS-CIAC. How have you kept going with your programming through COVID? And how do Connecticut athletes, adaptive sports athletes, or athletes of any type, how do they keep going in terms of their well-being, where they are mentally after losing their seasons or missing out on opportunities due to COVID? And is that playing out any differently in the adaptive sports world?
So fantastic question. And I'm glad we're going to get a chance to discuss this. So it's hitting the adaptive sports community just as hard, if not harder, because, you know, there still are less resources allocated to, you know, inclusive or adaptive sports programming, right? And so it's hitting communities really hard. You know, I think in the short term, we've tried to pivot to, you know, virtual components, whether, you know, I created this project with Nike earlier in the summer, which, you know, we call Train Anytime, Anywhere for athletes with disabilities to, you know, work on their wheelchair basketball skills at home, whether it was in a living room. I mean, we got creative. I did a IG live wheelchair basketball workout from my garage with the Boston Celtics earlier in the year. You know, but I would be remiss to say it is the impact on individuals with disabilities from a sport perspective for adaptive athletes has been really high. And then also, you know, when you look at, you know, we are a very fragile community, you know, so the pandemic has hit individuals with disabilities extremely hard, you know, with not having access to their typical services and programs. So it has been a tough thing, you know, for our youth athletes and the college athletes I work with. We always have the mantra, this too shall pass, right? You know, and I think, you know, that's kind of an important message to understand that, you know, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And what can you do in the short term to use this time to better yourself long term? You know, like one of the things I love to do is I love to read, you know, books about, you know, historical characters, right? And I love to just kind of submerge myself in, you know, education and different things like that. You know, so I've had more time to do that because I haven't traveled nearly as much as I used to. So I think, you know, as we go on into the winter months here in Connecticut and still very much in the, you know, what would be the epicenter of a pandemic, I think it's staying mentally strong and being willing to admit when you are struggling, right? Because I think oftentimes, you know, we don't talk about that, right? And I think there's a stigma for mental health, and this is hard on everybody. This is hard on, you know, professional athletes. This is hard on kids. This is hard on parents. This is hard on everybody. But also finding those silver lining, to really find things that you're interested in and stay passionate about, find your purpose through this tough time period. And by all means, if you need help, finding that help. I know you guys are all coming from different schools and things like that, but I know there's always resources available. And it's okay to not be okay. I think, I think when I jump on calls, there's a lot of times where, the first 15 minutes of a conversation, everybody's just kind of debriefing where they are mentally and emotionally. And I think, I think that's great. And I would try we really encourage our athletes to stay, as invested in each other and their friends and their peers as much as possible. I wish we weren't talking about this movement as like social distance. I think it's physical distancing, because I still think, naturally humans need to be able to communicate, whether that's FaceTime or whatever the case may be. So, kind of to summarize, I would say find stuff that you still are passionate about, maybe things that you want to try for the first time, you want to pick up. And then if you need help, invest in that help.
That's great insight, Ryan. And we urge everybody to stay tuned for our college fair coming up at 12:45. Last question for you, Ryan, talking about things people have lost during COVID. I don't think you'll mind me sharing that last photo we saw was of you and your fiance, Lindsay.
Yeah.
You lost a wedding that was supposed to be on July 4th weekend that's had to be rescheduled. So we certainly, all of us have lost something or more than something in this. And I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. The question I wanted to get to, what message would you give our students, a parting message? And this was off one of the questions they asked. How do you make a student, a classmate of yours that is dealing with a disability feel included? And how do you encourage them to be a leader? And are you, what message and feedback do you get from your campers and your athletes as how their high school experience is? Are they feeling included? Did you catch the end of that question, Ryan? It looks like you might have froze up
that's
for
a
a
loaded
second.
question here with a couple minutes to go, but I'll do the best I can on this one,
Yeah,
John.
you give us the Cliff Notes version, but thank you for your
No,
thoughts on this.
I think I got the majority of it. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think inclusion is as hard as people make it, right? And I think inclusion, it's not something you do, it's something you feel, right? So when I go into an environment, right, being a person who uses a wheelchair to get around, so I'll use this as an example. So I get paid by this large company to do an inclusion seminar, right? And so it's a Fortune 500 company. It's broadcasted all over the world. And I go to get to the stage and the ramp has brooms, all this other stuff that I can't basically get to the main stage. And mind you, they've paid me thousands of dollars and flown me in to do this speech. That's not an inclusive environment, right? It's kind of a no-brainer, but I know right away. And one of the things we teach our individuals with disabilities is if it's not an inclusive environment, you don't want to be there. Because if it's not authentically inclusive, yes, you're going to be in the room, but your voice isn't going to be heard, right? And so I think inclusion is easy, right? Like how do we make sure everybody has this access? So it's easy in theory, and it's kind of like what the Supreme Court says. You know it when you see it. Like I can go into a school system and kind of probably tell you the reaction of their students with disabilities, based on how that conversation goes with the principal, or when I talk to the school nurse, or when I talk to, the therapist or the psychologist at a school, right? So I think inclusion is fundamentally easy. How do we make sure that every single opportunity is available to every single person, right? And maybe harder in practice, but it's one of those things, it when you see it. I think, so we empower our athletes with disabilities to kind of be able to analyze their situation. And the biggest thing we teach them is to advocate for themselves, right? Because oftentimes, going back to the scenario that I told you, that group paid me thousands of dollars and keeps me on retainer, right? So I said something, right? But I didn't have to, because it potentially was more detrimental to me to do that than to just kind of laugh it off. But I think from an inclusion perspective, it just has to be a commitment from the top down, right? I think every school system says, yeah, we want to be inclusive. Yeah, we want to do this. We want to do that. But the question is, well, how do you do that, right? And I think when I was a kid, I think that was something that we didn't see. Like I didn't turn on the TV and see the Paralympic Games and different things like that. So I think we've improved on inclusion. But I still think there's a way to go. And I just would encourage the students, in the community that you work out of, like, the school you go to, how inclusive, how inviting is it? And it's a simple thing, right? Are you letting the kid with a disability who's sitting at the lunchroom by themselves sit by themselves, right? If your school has unified sports, are you going to watch the unified basketball game like you would the varsity basketball game? Like those are simple things. Would those show a commitment to a culture of inclusivity on your campus, right? So I don't think it's a hard thing to do. I think it just needs to be intentional.
Great messages, Ryan. Thank you for all your time. And quickly, how can people connect with you on social media? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to take Coach Moore's lead, and I'll just put my social media handles in the chat and different things like that. And if there was a question that you had, John, I know we're over time. I'm happy to take a few more, but I welcome anybody to, go ahead and, send me a tweet or an Instagram message or something like that. And I'll be happy to try to get back to you on those questions.
Well, Ryan, thank you. I value our friendship. I know the students appreciate your time, as we can see in the chat. Continued success to you, and thanks again.
Yeah, John, pleasure to be able to connect with you on this. Once again, always a treat to work with you, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Ryan Martin from the Ryan Martin Foundation has been our fourth and final speaker today. Our college fair is coming up, but first we want to go back to our student moderators, Fiona, Justin, and Jada. Guys, take it away.
So we just want to thank our 4 guest speakers for today, and soon Aaron will send in the chat the link to all the college fairs that you can go to, and you'll break out after your 10-minute break.
So after hearing all our great, inspiring speakers, you guys could type in the chat. So the question is, what does leadership mean to you guys?